Brilliant light streamed through the window, the banquet table lavishly laid out. Servants took turns exclaiming praise. Congratulations, young Master Isaac. Only 10 years old, and you've already received a recommendation to the Royal Academy. Truly a prodigy, young Master. Lyra smiled gently. Congratulations, sir. Young Master, since today is a momentous day, I've prepared all your favorite dishes. Isaac gladly accepted everything. Yak smiled and replied, Thank you, nurse. He was Isaac von Goethe, 10 years old. Hans brought a large box. Please accept this as well. It's a small gift from me. Isaac was startled in surprise. A gift? I already told you there's no need for such formality. He insisted on giving it. How could I refuse? Because of the medicine the young master provided when my son was ill, the boy kept his life. Hans affirmed firmly. Compared to that debt of gratitude, this present is nothing. Isaac couldn't help but be moved. Hans. Yak could no longer refuse. Thank you, sir. I will accept it. Jonas suddenly ran over excitedly. Brother, the boy eagerly brought his lute. Let me play a congratulatory piece for you. Isaac was extremely surprised. Hans whispered, Young Master Jonas's plucking skill is so outstanding that even the court musician praised him as a prodigy last time. Isaac smiled and replied, Is that so? Then play something for me to hear. Jonas immediately prepared. Yes, sir. Small fingers plucked the strings, but the peaceful scene gradually shifted. Jonas, don't. Isaac jolted awake in bed. He took a moment to collect himself. It was only a dream, Isaac muttered to himself. Ridiculous, indeed. It seems I dreamed of a distant past. There's no returning to that time anymore. Familiar footsteps drew near. Lucas quickly arrived. He carried breakfast. It's morning, young Master Isaac. Lucas immediately sensed something was off and realized Isaac was unwell. It seems you had a nightmare. You look quite pale. He replied tiredly, rubbing his aching head. I only dreamed of some old things. Lucas asked casually, From when, sir? He recalled vaguely about 20 years ago, setting the breakfast aside. Too long ago. Rather than dwell on those antiquated memories, Lucas suggested, How about we try some fresh cheese? After breakfast, we'll start the sword training we left off yesterday. Lucas quickly left. Enjoy your meal. Isaac frowned in thought. About 20 years ago, when he was around 10, 1 month before entering the Royal Academy, he contracted a sudden fever. The violent illness lasted 3 months. Seeing no improvement, his father, Count von Goethe, sought out scholars at the Mage Tower. He received news that, due to a peculiar constitution, the mage stated, As you know, every being possesses an innate mana vessel. Mana circulates at a rate corresponding to the size of that vessel. However, the mana flow within your son's body is highly abnormal. It's so rapid and violent that it's unpredictable. At this rate, the vessel will soon shatter. He could only clutch his head in despair. The truth he'd long avoided finally struck. Mana within his body erupted violently like an explosion and then collided with mana from outside, causing a horrifying mana blast. He had to endure agonizing pain. Many people were killed and injured. When he calmed down, he saw they had died from the sudden blast. Not only those in the mansion, but even my father, von Goethe, did not escape. Isaac made his decision. Lock me away. Tears streamed down Isaac's cheeks, loneliness enveloping him in a place no one could reach. From then on, Isaac stayed in the cellar, where no one could be harmed. While eating, he told himself, I was only 15 then, weren't I? Suddenly, there was a harsh cough at his ear. Isaac turned back anxiously. Hans was coughing, bright red blood clearly on his hand. Isaac immediately went pale. He was coughing up blood. It was one of the symptoms of mana poisoning, because he had been near me for too long. He unconsciously clenched his fingers and hurried forward to support Lucas. Because you've been by my side, though you needn't have been, you must rest for at least a month. He couldn't help but laugh. If I'm not here, who will serve you? Young master, besides me, you don't really have any friends, do you? He scolded. Do you want me to throw you out for insolence? Lucas obediently. Don't worry, don't you know me? He proudly patted his chest. Even if you've caused dozens of mana explosions, I haven't lost a hair. You won't find anyone like me. Isaac stood dazed and worried. One mistake could cost him everything. He turned away coldly. Now go away. I'll take the medicine. Don't bother me. Yes, young master. You really are. Lucas respectfully closed the door. Serving you is my honor. The space shifted. Isaac suddenly snapped awake. Congratulations, young Master Isaac. He was wearing formal attire at the center. Everyone lay collapsed on the ground in pain. Pained groans echoed throughout the banquet. The space was silent and bleak to the extreme, truly chaotic. A familiar voice rang out. You have finally arrived. Isaac panicked and looked back. Welcome back. Lucas stood alone in the corner of the room, his blood-covered face smiling. Long time no see, young master. He woke from the nightmare, cold sweat pouring like a stream. Isaac was alone again in the cellar. Lucas had died. After coughing up blood and leaving, he never returned for over a year. I had great difficulty hearing of his death from my father. That day, another mana outbreak occurred, and I locked my door. He probably skipped many meals. Isaac sank into profound regret. I should have kept my distance. I shouldn't have entangled myself. I should have been colder. Isaac could not stop regretting. If I had done that, then everything. A few more years passed, and he lost the will to eat. Food went moldy and piled up day by day, and yet I remain alive. So from now on, I must move forward. The youth of once had become middle-aged, but his appearance was that of an old man. In over 30 years living underground, I devoted myself entirely to studying magic to overcome this peculiar constitution. And now, there was nothing more that books could teach me. Only intuition and insight remain. Isaac muttered as if hypnotizing himself. You who begin the journey, you who are utterly alone, can you stand alone before the infinite lonely world where only mana exists and you remain? Awaken yourself. Years passed, and I finally found a clue to overcome my condition. The quality of meals seemed to be declining. Isaac was somewhat puzzled. What was happening with the family? I should remove the mold before eating. Research papers continued to arrive, but he sat back at the table, eyes lifted to the marked wall. Isaac stared for a moment. Am I 71 years old? It had been a long time since anyone had come here. He stepped cautiously closer. He was astonished to hear Jonas's younger brother call out. It's me, Jonas. Are you sleeping? Isaac was stunned and could hardly believe it, rushing to the door. Jonas, why have you come here? He was silent for a moment. Jonas asked hesitantly, May I come in? Isaac hurriedly kept his distance. Stand there and speak. Have you been well lately? Jonas unexpectedly revealed. Do you know? Today is our father's memorial day. He asked dazedly, How did father die? Jonas replied cautiously, It's a long story. Do you want to hear it? Isaac answered, If you don't mind. Jonas rewound to the past. Then it must begin 30 years ago. At that time, a succession war erupted between the crown prince and the second prince. The two talked for a long time. It had been a long time since he had spoken with another person. Isaac couldn't hide the joy in his eyes, feeling as if he had returned to childhood. He sincerely praised. I must admit, you tell stories very well. I lost track of time. Jonas burst into hearty laughter. Really? If I'd known, I'd have wandered the world and lived like a poet. He suddenly mentioned, But with only one arm it probably wouldn't be easy. Isaac flinched guiltily. I am sorry. Truly sorry. Jonas said that everyone loved him very much. It's a pity. The last time I wanted to see your face, brother. Isaac was instantly horrified. The last time, Jonas continued to explain. As the war raged, his breath grew weak. A gate opened. Monsters from an unfamiliar, distant world. The extremists of a new faith. The crimes they committed. When he opened the door, Jonas collapsed. He had no breath left. Isaac couldn't help but feel anguish, staring in shock at the sword beside Jonas. Did you really keep talking all that time? Isaac decided to take him outside. Come on, you can't just lie here forever. He helped his younger brother up, stepping carefully. He couldn't hold back his tears. Why? Why are you so light? Just how much have you starved yourself? The door to the outside was right before him, and a cold wind struck his face. Isaac had not seen the light in a long time. Yet this time he saw such a tragic sight. A giant monster had destroyed everything. Isaac reached out to catch it. Snow was falling. Jonas, the ground is frozen. I can't bury you now. We'll wait until spring. I'll bury Jonas in the family cemetery, and then I will rest too. Time passed. Trees began to bud, bringing the warmth of approaching spring, and a butterfly landed on the sword's hilt. A simple grave marker was erected. Isaac finished burying his kin, and he clenched a stone tightly. Isaac slowly reached up with his age-wrinkled hand, and a blazing flame appeared. He smiled with relief. Do you see, Jonas? Isaac was deeply moved. Though belated, I finally did it. The stone in his hand split in two. After years of study, I had overcome this constitution. Isaac wearily sank down. Now I can rest, can't I? For years he had tormented himself. Could I be forgiven even a little? If I had been a little faster, if I hadn't wasted so much time in despair, would anything have changed? Isaac breathed his last beside his family. Time passed, and he lay there motionless. Suddenly someone called anxiously, "Young master, did you have a nightmare?" He vaguely recognized the voice. Hans. No, Hans has been dead for a long time. Blinding light shone through the window. Isaac startled awake from his delirious sleep. He had become much younger, astonishment on his face. Hans, pulling back the curtains, asked, "You're soaked in cold sweat. Your complexion is pale." Hans anxiously stepped forward. "Didn't sleep well?" Isaac looked around suspiciously. "Am I dreaming? Or is this a final flash before death?" Hans stared blankly after him. "Young master, it's dangerous. Young Master Jonas, come down quickly." The childish voice made Isaac start. "I told you I'm fine." The boy turned back just in time. Jonas called out cheerfully, "Brother." Isaac forced a smile in return, sweating coldly. Jonas held a doll, sitting on the tree and beaming at him. He managed a strained smile, trying to look as if nothing was wrong. Hans repeated the plea. "I told you to come down already. It's not a dream." Isaac accepted reality. "I've gone back to the past. You who begin the journey, you who are utterly alone, can you stand alone before an infinite, desolate world where only mana exists and you remain? Awaken yourself. Let go of your thoughts. Discard the perspectives engraved in your life. Break the chains of the past and become the true person you are." A new opportunity had come to him. Shards of pottery were scattered all over the room. The maids whispered among themselves, "This room is a mess. The young master is truly ungrateful, hot-tempered. Tomorrow when the master returns, I'll quit." They chatted freely. Perhaps his illness had made his temper more sensitive. Hans, furious, was about to rush forward. Were they saying, "I'll teach them a lesson"? Isaac pulled him back. "That's enough, Hans." He turned away self-consciously. "They're not wrong." Isaac couldn't bear it either. "You shouldn't keep coming to see me. Hans, you were hurt just for being near me today." He couldn't stand it, looking back with sad eyes. He knelt before him. "No, young master." Hans persisted in comforting him. "I still care for you. You're just going through a difficult period now. It will pass, and then none of this will be a big deal." He smiled reassuringly. "Isn't that how life is?" Thus, the one who once smiled brightly ended up dying in a mana explosion caused by me. Those who cared for me all died because of this heart. Isaac blamed himself. "No, I killed them." Jonas outside still called, "Brother, play with me." Lyra called anxiously, "Please come down." Isaac gradually hardened his resolve. If this was reality, then what I must do? Hans smiled brightly, ready to take orders. "Yes, young master." Isaac coldly ordered, "Get out. Get out of my sight now." Hans froze for a moment, then obeyed. "At your command." He had made up his mind. It would be better this way. Being near me only brings danger. Hans hesitated for a moment, as if seeing through Isaac. "Please don't try to shoulder everything alone. Sometimes you can trust us too." Isaac didn't remember him ever saying those words, or whether he was still dreaming simply to hear them. He swung his hand and slapped his own face. "It hurts. Is this really real? Then how did I die before?" He turned his gaze back to the outside. Isaac resolved, whether it's a dream or real, it doesn't matter. I must prevent myself from ever triggering a mana outburst again. In the past, there was someone born with the same abnormal constitution. His name was Zeke von Goethe. He reached a realm no other human had, a level 10 archmage, and he is my ancestor across many generations. After investigating underground, I found the records he left behind. Because of that, I understood better how to utilize this special constitution. After years of meticulous research, I discovered a method to overcome it. Isaac quickly perfected it. This was the first step. Runestone, the ultimate crystallization of my findings carved onto mana stone, then ignited and fused to form the runestone. He murmured, "My hands once trembled with age, but now it's so easy. It's good to be young again." To prevent the side effects of the abnormal constitution, the mana explosions, the mana container must withstand the chaotic flow within. But my mana flowed too fast, too violently for the container to bear. A normal person would die the moment it shattered. But strangely, My container regenerated as if it had never been broken. Because of that, it could explode 10 or 20 times. Isaac couldn't help but tell himself, I'm truly a disaster. This runestone helps safely replace mana conduits. A continuous shock force is applied to the damaged area, forming new conduits. Thus, the impulse of the raging mana is dispersed. He pondered deeply. The success rate is extremely low. Before dying, I succeeded only once. Isaac remembered clearly. That small flame was the proof. Tension began to build. Would this attempt succeed? A fierce flame flared up, but grew far larger than expected. Isaac was extremely astonished, and he felt quite elated by this transformation. He could not control this power. Isaac's heart throbbed painfully. The conduits had reacted. Mana flowed throughout his body. Isaac was baffled and didn't understand. The stone in his hand lit up, a small flame sparking from it. It grew larger, more intense. He joyfully realized, I knew it. The conduits have increased to 3 now. Isaac was stunned for a moment. Each conduit has its own function and pathway. Now I can cast 3 spells simultaneously. It's working. He calmed himself. No, this was not my goal. My goal is to prevent any mana explosions from happening again. Therefore, 3 conduits are not enough. I must use magic more frequently to expand the conduits, reducing the burden on the mana container. Until that is achieved, I will not let anyone stay by my side. Time passed quickly. Night had fallen. Hans arrived, cheerfully carrying things. It's time to eat, young master. He acted as if nothing had happened. Cold meat sandwich. Isaac had nothing to say. I told you to go outside. Hans wouldn't listen. You've been eating too little lately. Please take a bite. He was completely helpless. The man wouldn't heed a word he said. Isaac couldn't understand. And what was with this gentle, sweet tone? The man was extremely earnest. I'll leave right after you take a bite. Hurry up. He tried to probe. Hans, how old am I? Hans answered immediately. You are 12 this year, sir. Isaac relented and took a bite. He supposed he had to act like a normal child of this age. He took a test bite. Isaac realized at once. This bread must have been made by the nanny. It had been a long time since he'd tasted this flavor. He devoured his dinner, which made Hans visibly happy. Isaac suddenly remembered. Where's the nanny? I didn't see her today. Hans explained. Yes. Her son has pneumonia. Isaac paused slightly, the spoon still half in his mouth. He put the spoon down. So she returned home, he remarked coldly. A nanny leaves her post for her child. In another household, she wouldn't be allowed to keep working. This place really is a kind family. Hans widened his eyes in surprise, as if he hadn't expected the young master to say that. The fire in the room crackled. Isaac fell into thought and unconsciously clenched his hand. Isaac decided to ask, Is Hinder the only one with pneumonia? The man breathed a sigh of relief. Hans reported, No, all the children in that village are sick. He nodded in confirmation. I understand. I recalled now. The epidemic broke out at this time. The Black Goose Village was the origin. The nanny lost her son in that incident and lived her life in unending grief. In her final moments, Lyra had said, That's good, young master. Isaac thought to himself, I don't want her to go through that again. He rested his chin on his hand, pondering. The cause of the pneumonia remained a mystery. The meal was momentarily abandoned. Isaac shifted his thoughts and sprang to his feet. Hans, have any monsters been killed in that area recently? On a late, quiet night, a large stag was strolling through the forest. Suddenly it flinched, sensing danger. A fireball unexpectedly struck the stag. It fled in a panic. Isaac walked slowly closer, appearing regretful. I thought it was a wolf. Isaac continued deeper into the forest. He was heading straight for Black Goose Village. Hans was quite surprised by Isaac's question. A monster hunted in Black Goose Village? He tried to recall. I didn't see it clearly myself, but someone from the magic tower came here and bought its corpse as research material. Hans hadn't paid it much mind at the time. I did glance at it a bit then. It looked exactly like a giant spider covered in silver fur. Isaac quickly narrowed down the target. If Hans's description was accurate, then that monster was surely, Isaac stated with certainty, a winter spider. Winter spiders are not particularly powerful monsters. However, they often form large swarms thanks to their astonishing reproduction rate. The dire problem lies in the amount of mana these creatures possess. If exposed to mana at high density, the body becomes mana poisoned. That toxin then causes the victim to gradually suffocate. Isaac was gathering a large quantity of herbs, working without pause. The children in Black Goose Village must have been poisoned by the manna emitted by the winter spiders. He had already filled his bag with herbs. Isaac had found the reason. Yet in this era, knowledge of manna poisoning was very limited. That's why they mistook the illness for pneumonia. He glanced back at the basket. There should be enough herbs. Giving these to the children would help ease the symptoms. Isaac knew how to deal with the disease, but the treatment's effect would only be temporary. To prevent recurrence, those monsters had to be eliminated entirely. I could ask my parents for help, but my father is often stationed at the border fortress, and my mother is traveling across the continent searching for a cure for my abnormal constitution. Isaac thought to himself, if I just wait for them, Hinder's life will be in danger again. Isaac quickly went to the village and went straight to the nanny's house. Lyra was anxiously sitting at the bedside. She was startled by the sound and carefully opened the door. Who is it? Lyra was so surprised she froze. When Isaac pulled his hood down, You look exhausted, Nanny. Lyra gasped. Young master, she anxiously asked. Why have you come at this hour? And what's wrong with your clothes? Has something happened at the mansion? Lyra carefully wiped the dirt from his face. Good heavens, you're covered in mud. Isaac was a bit moved and was about to step inside. You haven't come to work for many days, so I dropped by to see how you were. She suddenly stopped him. Wait, you can't come in. Lyra only feared Isaac might catch the disease. They say Hinder has pneumonia. What if you get infected? Isaac took out a mask and put it on. Is this enough? She really didn't dare. But, sir, Isaac handed a large bag to Lyra. Don't worry about that. Take this. She asked, dumbfounded, what's inside? He answered briefly. Herbs, chopped or crushed, brewed twice in a pot, cooled, then give it to him to drink. Isaac walked straight into the inner room and stood by the sickbed watching. Isaac immediately concluded, these bluish-purple spots are definitely manna poisoning. He shook the patient. Hinder, can you hear me? He weakly lifted his eyelids. Upon waking, Hinder implored, Young master, please don't fire my mother. He coughed, but still tried to explain. Mother can't go to work because of me. It's because I'm sick. Isaac assured him. I won't fire her. He checked Hinder's temperature. Your mother is the only one who secretly slipped me a barley sandwich. Rest and recover quickly. Time passed quickly until the next morning. He was guided by the healer. This is the abandoned mine you were looking for. Isaac peered inside. Are you sure this is a limestone cave? It's really dark in here. The man affirmed decisively. Yes, I'm sure. Isaac offered a gold coin as payment. Thanks. This is fine. Leave the rest to me. The healer turned back to warn. Be careful. People have gone missing around here before. Isaac replied as he walked. Thank you for the warning. He had ruled out other locations. Winter spiders favored limestone caverns. Since this was the only limestone cave in the area, it was very likely their lair. Isaac was prepared. So before entering, sparks flashed around him. Need to prepare a bit. Last time, by opening new conduits in the mana system, I could cast 3 types of magic simultaneously. With that ability, the power could rival a Tier 2 spell. However, everything has its limits. If overexerted, my mana vessel could shatter. Isaac calculated carefully. Since he didn't know how many winter spiders were inside, he couldn't use magic recklessly. That's why he needed this. The Frostbane Nightshade plant. Usually its berries are diluted to make anesthetics or sedatives. It looked exactly as the books described, but to winter spiders it was a lethal poison. He decisively pulled them up. It was ridiculous that they lived in the same environment as his fatal weakness. How ironic. Time flew until noon. Isaac now had a sack full of Frostbane Nightshade. His arms ached. I should have at least brought gloves. The toxin is really strong. Isaac felt ready. All right, that's enough preparation. I made plenty of runestones at the mansion, so it's time to go. He pressed deeper inside. The cave grew darker and darker. Isaac stopped before a sheer cliff. A strong wind blew up where he stood. To die in a place like this would be a meaningless death. Isaac searched around. It seemed to be right below, but how get down there? He happened to spot a rope ladder, which looked to be still in fairly good condition. Isaac felt a bit tense, but did not hesitate much. He descended the ladder and landed safely on the lower level. Isaac was exhausted and trembling, his brows knitted. It seemed he'd found the right place. In front of him lay piles of dry bones. The corpses stacked on the floor looked as if all their bodily fluids had been drained. Here were human clavicles. Could these be the missing people the hunter had mentioned? A piercing sound echoed nearby. Isaac flinched in alarm. The pressure drew nearer and nearer. He carefully prepared to confront it, mana in his hands growing strong. He was ready to fight. Isaac hurled a fireball at the winter spiders, successfully creating a safe zone. These creatures were very afraid of fire, so this would drive them back for a while. Isaac unloaded some gear. I need to be ready before they surround me. He put a mask over his nose and mouth, then took out the frostbane poison and squeezed his eyes shut to focus intensely. Isaac fixed his gaze on the target. First, the herbs. He decisively set the sack of nightshade alight. A faint poisonous scent spread through the air. The winter spiders seemed to slow down. They hesitated to attack, trying to back away to create distance. This was Isaac's chance. All right, let's start the hunt. He sprang to his feet, fired up with determination. Inside a study room, Isaac sat working at a desk. Suddenly, a loud voice rang from outside. What on earth did you do to let things get this bad? Isaac curiously stepped closer to the window and looked down. Watch your tongue. You stand before a noble lord, Liam shouted angrily. Right now I'm questioning the lore of this land about why you failed to protect your own people. Why did you abandon Black Goose Village like that? Why? The other suddenly barked. Shut your mouth. Isaac turned and went back to his place. So noisy. Maybe I should have them board up those windows, or just move everything down to the basement. Down there it's quiet, and no one passes by. That way I can focus better on researching my unusual condition. Also, I should coat the walls with marium, since it's a mineral with high magic resistance. It would help a lot against mana explosions. Isaac looked up and asked, What do you think, Hans? The room was empty. There was no one but him. Isaac stared in shock, and he softly said, All right, Hans has. Isaac bowed his head and continued writing diligently. The scratch-scratch sound rang out. Silence returned to the room, and his writing sped up. Isaac's eyes widened as he looked down. He wrote with increasing fervor. One eye opened wide, terrifying. All that remained in the room was the sound of the pen. Back in the cavern, the scent still lingered in the air. Isaac sat motionless, thinking. He looked up and silently asked himself, Why do I keep dwelling on these old memories? The frostbane nightshade seemed to be working quite well on the winter spiders. I can't feed those monsters the poison directly, but if I burn it and let the smoke spread like this, their bodies will gradually paralyze until they suffocate to death. Of course, I'm not safe from that smoke either. That's why I have to wrap a wet handkerchief around my face as a primary filter, then use the mana in my body to purify the rest. At the same time, I formed a small fireball and used phase-shifting magic to maintain the balance between purification, fire magic, and the phase change spell. Now I can develop 3 types of magic simultaneously across 3 mana channels, also called multi-channel. Thanks to that, I bought enough time for the spiders to weaken. Isaac pointed his finger forward. A massive explosion followed. The spiders burst apart. He strolled through the sea of flames. Suddenly, Isaac felt something strange behind him. He thought, It seems like they're all fleeing in the same direction. A light flashed in Isaac's eyes. Looks like there's a water source over there. He quickened his pace. Isaac's clothing suddenly caught fire. He hurriedly tore it off. These things burn well, but at this rate, I'll suffocate from the smoke. And it's unbearably hot. Isaac threw the garment to the ground. This has to end quickly. Night in the cavern grew cold. He walked along the flowing stream. Isaac shivered and hugged himself. It's freezing in here. I shouldn't have thrown away my coat. I didn't expect the temperature to drop low enough to freeze like this. He suddenly looked up. Wait, above Isaac was a nest of eggs. All of them eggs? If it lays this many eggs. Suddenly a sound rang out, and the noise made him startle. Isaac quickly turned to look, his eyes wide as he tried to focus and observe. The eggs were falling down. He calmed himself and raised his hand. Isaac launched the flames forward. The crackling of fire echoed. He stared in amazement at the scene. A drop of sweat rolled down Isaac's cheek. A massive spider suddenly appeared behind him. Isaac sensed it immediately. As it lunged up, he bolted away. Isaac sprang forward to evade. He turned to look back. Damn it. Why are those hunches of mine never wrong? Isaac froze when he saw it was the Winter Queen spider, distinct from the others. It was a monster resistant to fire and carrying the breath of frost. That's why it's called the winter spider. The spider lunged forward quickly. He hurriedly stood up to attack. A flame struck its face hard. Isaac gritted his teeth. As expected, A few fireballs alone couldn't make it burn like the others. The only consolation was that its movements weren't very agile. Suddenly, a wave of pain hit him. My body is starting to reach its limit. For a 12-year-old body with no real combat experience, staying up all night and casting magic all day leading to this was to be expected. While Isaac pondered, the spider advanced. He forced himself to lift his head. Isaac's eyes narrowed slightly. Images from the past surfaced. Oh, the barley bread Hans brought was really delicious. In this arid northern region, where even wheat struggles to grow, the reason I got to eat soft white bread was all thanks to the nanny. Because I'm picky and hate black bread, she went all the way to the distant city every week to buy the finest wheat. Isaac sneered unexpectedly. When I get back, I'll have to tell her to make plenty of. He took the shovel out of his backpack. Even the queen spider was, after all, just an arthropod. Isaac also took off his backpack. The pack swung in his hands, and then clang, shattered apart. The spider raised a leg as hard as stone to defend itself. The spider's eyes turned blood red. He charged at it with the shovel. His face grew more serious. The shovel plunged straight into the spider's eye, and a stream of sickly blue blood spurted out. Its painful scream echoed. Isaac gritted his teeth and pulled back. He slid down under the spider's belly, grabbing one of its legs tightly with one hand. A loud noise rang out as they both fell. Isaac scraped along the ground, having to hold on with all his strength. I'm still lacking the precision to hit them, and I don't have the spare strength to keep casting fireballs. Even if I get lucky and hit, I can't land a killing blow on a fire-resistant creature. In that case, I have to abandon ranged attacks. This was completely different from the earlier fireballs. Isaac frowned and shouted angrily, "Condense it more." He swung his arm and struck it hard. "Die already and be out of my sight." A large patch of the spider's back instantly froze. He immediately felt it lunging. It struggled up and, furious, charged at him as if to deliver a finishing blow. Its scream of agony reverberated through the cavern. It rolled over and over on the ground. It repeatedly spat out blue-colored attacks. Isaac reached to pull something out. I had to pull my hand back now, but his hand was soaked with blood and shaking uncontrollably, unable to do it. Isaac let out a breath. I got out. After a while, the spider's body was still burning. The two of them lay sprawled on the ground. A stone fell out of its body, looking exactly like a gem. He slowly opened his eyes. "Where is this?" Voices arguing loudly came from outside. "Have you told them that the young master snuck out of the mansion?" "Is it the nanny's voice?" "I wouldn't dream of saying a word. If that gets out, it'll be chaos right away." "Is it Hans?" Hans stammered in reply. "But you really didn't know? Didn't you hear the young master went all the way to that abandoned mine?" Lyra put a hand to her face. "I don't know either. A local hunter guided him there. But since then he's been busy hunting, so I don't know the exact situation." Isaac thought to himself, "Right, I defeated the Winter Queen Spider and then passed out after hitting my head. Luckily, I came to soon after and dragged myself out of that ruined mine to return to the village. After that, I found Hans standing at the village entrance. He saw me collapsed and panicked, then fainted on the spot." Isaac slowly opened his eyes. Indeed, by following the young master's instructions exactly, the boy Hinder had fully recovered. Hans smiled gently. That's just the young master's nature. After the mana explosion, he did become a bit more sensitive, but that compassionate heart of his won't change, will it? Isaac felt embarrassed at that. He sat bolt upright. Hans hurriedly looked over. "Young master, you're awake?" Isaac asked in a voice. "How long have I been asleep?" Hans answered immediately. "You've been asleep for about half a day. How do you feel?" "I'm fine, still within what I can endure." Lyra snapped angrily. "Within what you can endure? Why did you go alone into such a dangerous place?" Isaac was silent for a moment, then said, "I just accidentally fell while gathering some herbs nearby. Even if I told them a 12-year-old killed a monster, they'd just think I'm delirious. Better to make up some excuse." "So how's Hinder doing?" The boy lay in bed, eyes closed, but his complexion looked rosier. Lyra sighed and replied, "Thanks to the herbs you brought, he's improved a lot. The other children in the village are better too." Isaac looked up and smiled faintly, relieved. "Mana poisoning is best kept secret. If those above find out, the scholars will step in immediately." "Are all the winter spiders dead? Who could have done this?" "It would be troublesome if the spider corpses in the mine were discovered," Lyra suddenly asked. "But how do you know so much about those herbs?" Even the doctor sent by the Lord didn't know about them. Isaac instantly avoided the question. I just happened to read about them in some books. Don't mention it again. It's time to go. Hans. He looked embarrassed. Right now? It's snowing heavily outside. Isaac turned and got out of bed. If it's discovered that I snuck out of the mansion, your fate won't be good either. Right? Lyra brought a basket of fruit to Isaac. Please take these as well. The villagers asked me to send them as a token of gratitude to you. He picked up one of the fruits and looked at it. Nanny, please rest for another week. Isn't it only when Hinder fully recovers that you'll be able to work with peace of mind? She looked a little awkward. Is that really okay? The head steward certainly won't let it go. Isaac suddenly said, Who says I'm only letting you rest? He held up an apple and ordered, Use these to make jam. She asked again, Make apple jam? Isaac took a bite and replied, Yes. To eat with the barley bread when you return to work. Lyra was a little stunned. Then she smiled, a tear gathering at the corner of her eye. Or could I also make an apple pie? Isaac smiled approvingly. Sounds good. That morning the sky was clear and the sun mild. At a large manor, Isaac ran while breathing deeply. A week passed, and his speed improved tremendously. During that time, my mana channels also underwent changes. 3 mana circulations increased by 1, bringing the total to 4. As a result, my mana flow became significantly more stable. The number of spells I could cast simultaneously also increased to 4 layers. Fighting the winter spiders and pushing myself to the limit likely helped a great deal. The daily running efforts certainly contributed as well. Using magic requires careful calculation and sharp intuition. It's a process that consumes a lot of energy. When the body is exhausted, the mind collapses too. A clear mind needs a resilient body as its foundation. The reason I quickly hit my limit in that abandoned mine was this untrained, immature body. In my previous life, Lucas regularly trained my physical strength. An image of Lucas smiling appeared, and his face suddenly grew somber. A sudden call rang out. Young master, Schiller has brought Andrine. Today is your scheduled health check. Isaac stopped and wiped his sweat. Head steward Schiller put his hand on his chest and smiled brightly. Greetings, young master. How are you feeling today? This is my father's personal physician, the most renowned doctor in the surrounding regions. Proceed here. Andrine stepped forward to examine. It seems there are no serious issues today. In fact, you look healthier than ever. Then I'll begin adjusting your prescriptions. Isaac thought indifferently. Are they going to draw conclusions like that without question? The man opened his case. Inside were 6 vials. This is a remedy called Panacea. It helps stabilize mana flow. Isaac picked up a vial and looked. Panacea? Huh. Father really went to the trouble to find me a top-tier item. In common parlance, Panacea is understood as a cure-all. For some, it's used as a stimulant and a strength enhancer for soldiers. Although this drug is known for stabilizing mana flow to make circulation smoother, that understanding arose from a mistranslation of ancient texts. Its true effect is to stimulate mana flow. In other words, it's tantamount to a poison for someone whose mana is out of control like mine. However, under the current circumstances, it will act as an appropriate catalyst. If used well, it will help me increase the number of mana circulations. Then see you next month, sir. All right. Thank you for your efforts. After Andrine left, Isaac turned and saw Schiller watching him. Do you have something to say? Schiller replied. You seem rather calm today. You wore a perplexing expression. Doesn't he usually fly into a rage when being examined? That's why all the physicians under the domain refuse to be his personal doctor. Isaac laughed when he heard that. Is that so? Should I have lost my temper? Schiller fell silent for a moment, then mouthed something. The next words made him freeze. I heard you cured the pneumonia of the children in Black Goose Village. Isaac asked calmly. Already know about that? Schiller answered frankly. I only heard it from Hans. Isaac thought. So he questioned Hans after all. Schiller's face grew angry. If this becomes public, the council will surely not let it go. This time I will let it pass. But from now on, I hope you will exercise more self-restraint. Schiller's gaze looked coldly at him. For a very long time, I could never be close to Schiller. He has always been a dry, rigid head steward, a cold old man who keeps his distance from everyone. Yet Schiller suddenly picked up Isaac's suitcase. If you truly cannot restrain yourself, then at least consult me first with a word. He was surprised by that sight, too. According to what Jonas told him just before dying, Schiller, who had served the von Goethe family since the previous lord, had stayed at his post until the von Goethe house collapsed. Then he sacrificed his life. In truth, he always cared deeply for this family. Isaac nodded with a smile. I understand. Thank you, Schiller. He remained silent and said nothing. Schiller thought for a moment, then asked, By the way, you've been running every day lately? Is there a particular reason for that? Isaac looked up and glanced at him. Throughout history, every mage who reached rank 5 and above trained their body rigorously. If the body is to conduct mana, doesn't it need a corresponding physical foundation? Schiller's eyes widened slightly in surprise. That evening, news circulated in a room that the head young master had completely cured the pneumonia of the children in Black Goose Village. The verification process was completed. Given this physical condition, the young master will find it difficult to use magic in the future. However, I dare say the path of a scholar or an alchemist might suit him better. With that, his lordship will likely have some of his worries eased. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Come in. A maid entered. Forgive the intrusion, sir. Schiller looked up. Rosa, it's you again. She answered a little fearfully. Please forgive me, head steward. The maids keep disappearing and never returning. I don't know about Clara's case, but as for Annette, she's a very diligent girl who hasn't missed a day in 3 years. Rosa's eyes read into the corner. I'm certain something bad has happened to her. Isn't this matter strange in some corner? The servants were talking among themselves. In just 2 short months, 3 maids had gone missing. What do you think? Region G was never an easy place to live. Bill said smugly that because it's so far north the weather is extremely harsh. On top of that, bandits and monsters cause trouble too. Lily pointed at him. So, you mean you're planning to pack up and run away too? Come on. I was only proposing a hypothetical. She bowed her head slightly and said, But at least Annette isn't the kind of person who would disappear without a word. She worked so hard to earn money for her father's medicine, didn't she? Bill sneered in rebuttal. Maybe she's just fed up with tending to that sick father of hers. Maybe she ran off with some lover. Rosa and Lily got angry at that. Watch your tongue. Bill spread his hands calmly. Just joking. Actually, I have my own suspicions. If you don't care, just listen. Well then, Bill suddenly put on a scary act. In my opinion, it's like this. A bold thought popped into his head. Could it be dark magic? The 2 girls were stunned. Dark magic? What else could it be? After all, this is the manner of a mage family, right? Besides, the young master's condition hasn't been looking good lately. If you were the master of this house, would you be willing to use magic at any cost? Lily blurted out. You mean the missing girls were taken to be used as live sacrifices? Rosa shouted. What nonsense are you spouting, Bill? If you keep weaving such strange rumors, I won't let it slide. He kept talking. And if you don't let it slide, what are you going to do? Me? Maybe I'm right. Rosa was furious. Our Lord is not that kind of person. He even took in a criminal like you with generosity. Bill remained stubborn. What? After ranting like that, you start scolding me now. A voice from behind made him jump. This story does sound rather interesting. Isaac crossed his arms and looked at Bill, asking, Why don't you tell me the details? He answered a little fearfully, It started 2 months ago, sir. Bill's gaze flicked elsewhere. First, the maid Hilda suddenly disappeared. A few weeks later, Clara also vanished without a trace. Finally, this past weekend, Annette went to church and never returned. The room fell silent. Isaac asked coldly, Do you know why? Bill thought for a moment before speaking. How can a child have such a terrifying gaze? Sir, I don't really know about that. Isaac immediately said, Tell the truth. I promise I won't punish you for this. He suddenly asked again, Young master, are you serious? What I say is of course true. Bill fell silent and bowed his head. Isaac's sudden question made him flustered. Do you think I'm the cause of this? Isn't that already obvious? Look at Hans. He's your closest servant, yet his body is always covered in wounds and bruises. He constantly moans in pain. I can't be sure of those people. Bill's voice grew quieter and quieter. Most likely it's him. I shouldn't have said anything. Isaac called out in a low voice. Bill begged fearfully, Please spare my life, young master. I haven't even married yet, haven't sired a single child. The parish priest used to say this life is a gift from God. Isaac looked at Bill calmly. You don't want to die, do you? Isaac held out his hand and offered, "Then serve me to atone for your sins." The man who had been begging fell silent. Night fell, the wind rustled. A cluster of blue flames drifted in the air. Isaac sat on the bed and looked up at the ceiling. Rosa, Anette. Images of the two girls appeared in the flames, and he spoke with an indifferent expression. "Yes, those are their names. Since Hans and my governess passed away, they were the only maids who volunteered to stay and serve me." The vial of medicine slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor, and a small drop of blood fell, drop by drop. Isaac waved his hand and ordered, "Both of you, step back. I want to be alone." The two maids were terrified, but Rosa still managed to speak. "Young master, what about your hand?" He snapped at once. "Didn't you hear me tell you to step back? These medicines are useless anyway. Don't ever bring them here again." Though frightened, Rosa still said, "But young master, please don't give up hope so quickly. Surely things will be all right." His face darkened and his voice turned icy. "Hope? How could you understand the feeling of taking the life of the person you love with your own hands?" Isaac clenched his hand tightly. "Can you imagine that kind of pain?" She looked at him in distress. Annette stepped forward and said, "I understand. I too caused my friend to lose her life by my own hands." Hearing that, he lowered his voice. "Your friend?" Rosa glanced down. Annette continued, "If only I'd turned back and looked at Clara even once. If I had reached out in time, perhaps I could have saved her." Annette lowered her head and looked at him. "I understand the young master situation is extremely unusual, but anyone in this world can accidentally do things against their will. At least once in a lifetime. That can happen to anyone." At that time, Annette's pessimism brought me a strange consolation. Back in the present, I should have questioned her more thoroughly about it then. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and a voice called from outside. "Young master, it's Bill." He sat up on the bed and asked, "Have you found any trace of those maids?" The man quickly replied, "Yes, sir. It didn't take me long to find out. I asked the beggars along the main streets, and their accounts all matched." Isaac, having heard that, asked further, "So what did you find?" Bill related plainly. "It turned out to be human traffickers. They used sweet talk, promising to take people to the prosperous South, then secretly sold them." He frowned in confusion. If they wanted to go south, they could have gone on their own. Why go through brokers? Bill raised his hands and sneered. "Young master, you still haven't grasped how the world works. There are the transportation costs for a long journey down to the south, the pay for mercenaries to protect against highwaymen along the way, and the paperwork needed to secure a free identity upon arrival. Tell me, could a group of frail women possibly handle all that by themselves?" Isaac propped his chin on his hand, thinking, "I see, that makes sense." Bill sighed to himself. Kids will always be kids. That brat knows nothing about the real world. A thought sprang into Bill's head. "Wait, could it be?" He blurted out suddenly. "I had to pay a hefty sum to get those beggars to speak up, sir, so I spent all the travel money you gave me." "Please, young master, could you give me a bit more?" he asked in disbelief. "All 20 silver coins? That's equivalent to half a year's wages." Bill laughed loudly. Isaac thought to himself, "Everyone's just being overly cautious." He said, "That small sum isn't the issue. What I need is to find them as quickly as possible." Bill beamed. "Oh my, the young master truly is generous. Is there anything else you need me to do?" Isaac answered, "Yes. I will ensure you are handsomely rewarded for this operation. Do you want to try?" Bill clasped his hands happily. "Of course, sir. I've snagged a fat goose this time." Indeed, in this world a smooth tongue keeps you well fed. If I can't fool this kid, I'll make a fortune from now on. This is a golden goose finally revealed. The only flaw is that the brat is like a ticking time bomb. But hey, no risk, no reward, right? He rejoiced loudly to him. "I can take you to the broker right away." Laughter grew louder and louder in Bill's head. Fortune favors the bold. Then he stood behind the bars, staring blankly. Inside were nothing but skulls and dust, and he was left wearing only a pair of short trousers. Bill grabbed the iron bars and shouted, "How did things end up like this?" Isaac stood in a corner watching him. "Why do I have to be in this damned place?" He held the mana stone and smiled cryptically. In the dungeon, there was a small drainage channel running through the middle, and a hand gripping the bars trembled. Bill ground his teeth in anger. Damn it. How did it come to this? He recalled earlier events. Everything had seemed fine. When I secretly took the young master out of the manor to the city of Bern, dealing with the broker to take the servants was easy. He said he was a noble traveling sow. However, at that moment, the broker's expression turned somber, but his gaze swept over Isaac's finely tailored clothes, then landed on that clean, handsome face. The broker's face broke into a sly smile. I understand why the young master attracted the trafficker's attention. After all, the young master has an attractive face. Bill thought of his body stripped bare, wearing only undershorts. Why had this happened to him? He grimaced and spun around. Besides, Isaac the young master didn't seem harmed at all, meaning they didn't even touch a hair on him because he was high-quality merchandise. And unlike in the books, he was focused on his own matters. Should I thicken the mana a bit more? Bill was furious. While I had been stripped bare from head to toe, left with only my underpants. He couldn't take it anymore and shouted. So what am I supposed to do now? I've come this far. Surely you have some plan, right? Bill urgently demanded. Stop playing with that rock and say something. Isaac calmly reminded him. Where did you leave all your manners? But he no longer cared. Can you afford manners in my position now? We're about to die. Bill exhaled. I'll go look for Annette and the others. Of course you should do that, if you have a way out of these bars. Suddenly he raised his hand, and something behind him trembled with a sound. Immediately after, a hole was chipped out of the iron frame and fell away. Bill's expression instantly turned to astonishment. He began to change his tone and called softly, Young master. Bill put on a conciliatory smile. You won't leave me here, will you? Isaac replied nonchalantly. Don't you know me? He pleaded. Come on, don't be like that. His voice carried outside. This place was like a maze. The two jailers became alert. What's that noise? Go check it out. Bill continued to frighten him. You could get lost and robbed. Unexpectedly, Isaac turned abruptly to leave. You think I can't handle that much? Fine, I'm off. Good luck. Wait, young master, he cried in panic. Isaac halted and turned his head back. Bill suddenly dropped to his knees. He begged desperately. Please save me. I beg you. I'll do anything. Isaac's steps faltered, and a thoughtful shadow passed over his eyes. He thought to himself, Do you know something? Bill looked at his posture. I have seen you do this before. A past image overlapped. Please save me, young master. Back then he had begged as well. I've truly lost my mind. I shouldn't have acted like that when you were kind enough to take me in. Sir, von Goethe said sternly. Bill, you used to be a robber. When von Goethe crushed the bandits, you survived by handing over information about your organization. But this time you betrayed House von Goethe, so he decided I can no longer trust you. He feared and tried to beg. Sir, please spare me this once. Schiller could not bear it and shouted. Enough. He directly questioned. Do you think the crime of trying to sell von Goethe's confidential files to a criminal organization can be taken lightly? Bill sobbed nonstop. Please, sir, I will never betray you again. But in the end, the sword fell and ended him. Von Goethe said, You would have been quite useful if you weren't so greedy. Isaac's face was expressionless. I vaguely remember that day. As a robber familiar with the underworld economy, Bill Chuck had exposed the servants using what he knew. And perhaps his claim of spending all the coins was also a lie. He pondered, if my memory is correct. The criminal organization Bill tried to sell the confidential files to in my previous life was the same group that abducted the servants. Now those bastards have expanded their power into human trafficking, and they will soon spread through von Goethe like mildew and begin torturing people. Anything that could threaten the family must be eliminated first. He took a roll of paper from his coat. You said you'd do anything, didn't you? He held it out to Bill. Then I have something I need you to do first. In the dimly lit room, beside the dining table, several men stood in a line. One of them was cutting meat on a plate. Father, you still won't eat anything. He put a piece of meat into his mouth. The guards paled and covered their mouths to listen. Please, father, eat something. I know you're getting thinner by the day. Nes raised his fork and pointed forward. The person is in there, right? Opposite him hung a skull on a wooden stake. Wait a little longer. When I succeed with dark magic, we will meet again. He sighed in melancholy. They still won't answer. Has their soul grown weak? Suddenly, Nes asked one of the men beside him, Hey, where's my bathwater? He stammered while the only ones left now were the stock awaiting sale. Suddenly, a huge hand slammed down. Nes hoisted him up with one hand. Blood began to gush out. splattering his face. The others listened in fear as he said, "This punishment should be enough for my bath, right?" NEAs glanced at them. "I will wait." A subordinate immediately replied, "I'll prepare it right away." Then he left down the dark corridor, leaving only 2 people and a corpse in the room. One man held his head and sighed. "Damn dark magic. How many times has this been now? In that bastard's food, in his bathwater. Next time just give him the goods we were supposed to sell, or we'll all end up dead." He rose and flipped the corpse over. "Stop complaining and take care of him properly." Suddenly a sound rang out, and the 2 peered curiously out the door, but the dark corridor showed no one. They glanced at one another, and suddenly both their faces turned pale with panic. The noise frightened them. What was that? The 2 men's faces no longer held calm. One of them quietly swallowed nervously. Suddenly something appeared. NEA's head, full of hair, rolled to their feet, and immediately after, NEA's bloodied, bulging-eyed face appeared. The 2 were instantly terrified, their fear so great that their legs gave out. Just then, a figure approached. He held a blood-stained knife. "Give me some water." Everyone's faces went ashen. "You are Bill," he said as he curled his lips in a faint smile, his blood-smeared appearance horrifying them. "Bill." He smoothed his hair and repeated, "Bring me a cup of water, you bastard." The 2 men's hearts pounded wildly. Thump, thump. At that moment, a figure approached. His blood-soaked appearance terrified them. "Bill." The knife in his hand trembled slightly. "Damn it, why am I doing this?" Bill's eyes showed undisguised displeasure. "It's all that bastard's fault." Earlier, Isaac had held a sheet of paper out in front of him. "You said you'd do anything, right? Then do this first." Bill stared blankly. "What's this?" He replied, "This is a contract." Isaac summarized quickly. Clause 1. Bill's side must obey all orders from Party A. Isaac, unconditionally. Clause 2. Bill's side must not disclose any information related to Party A. Isaac. Finally, he emphasized. Clause 3. If Party B violates any of the conditions, the punishment is death. Bill's face turned panicked. "Wait, what kind of conditions are these?" He pulled a knife out from somewhere. "You will sign it with blood. That's the only way the magic will take effect." "Perfect, that'll do the trick." He struggled. "Are you crazy? How can I sign that?" Suddenly a voice came closer. "Who's there?" Isaac smiled faintly and reminded him. "Come on, I don't have much time." He hit his weak point. "You don't want to live, do you?" Outside, footsteps were coming fast. In front of him lay the dangerous contract. The heavy saws running on the stone grew louder and clearer. Bill clenched his eyes shut in anger. Then he slammed his hand down and dropped the knife. "Damn it." Next, Bill grit his teeth and bit a cut into his fingertip. Without hesitation, he dabbed the paper with it. As soon as he did, the contract suddenly glowed. The corner of Isaac's mouth curved into a slight smile. At that moment, the jailers arrived. "Who are you? How did you get out?" Bill cried out in alarm. "They're here." Immediately, the 3 were struck in the face, and all of them fainted and collapsed to the ground. He asked in confusion, "Are they dead?" Isaac explained, "They're only unconscious." Bill still couldn't understand how it had happened. Suddenly, the gemstone in his hand struck his eye, and he stared in awe at the magic. The 2 of them went to another chamber outside the dungeon. Bill led the way with the knife, fawning as he chatted. "First time I've seen that ice magic, sir. You're amazing." But Isaac wasn't very impressed, which made sense. Ice magic wasn't very practical. He was surprised. "It's nothing," Isaac replied curtly. "It only looks like that." Suddenly Bill froze, and he whispered, "The robbers, 2 of them are hiding by that wall." Isaac said, "Bill, what do you need to make ice?" Out of the blue, he urged, "Guess." Bill hesitated a moment, then answered, "Wait, water." Isaac manipulated a pinch of water. "Right, whether it's humidity in the air or a puddle on the ground, you must shape the water into the form you want. The stream spins and then follows the sequence. Compress, condense, expand, then evaporate. It must pass through these 4 states." He continued to explain tirelessly. "Controlling each state individually is easy, but executing them continuously is not." Bill looked toward the jailers, anxious. "I'm going to get caught. Hurry up." One of them yawned and suddenly noticed something. Before he could react, Isaac lunged forward. "Who are you?" He coldly and gently struck with his hand, and at last a large water orb unexpectedly flew toward them. He could only stand there and take it without understanding anything. The other's expression went rigid, and then he was attacked. The magic shifted phase. He retracted the water orb. Because of all these steps, this type of magic is not common in battles. Isaac glanced down. If I didn't have this magic, I wouldn't bother using it either. In his hand, he held a chunk of ice magic stone. I found it in the corpse of a winter spider queen. Although this magic isn't widespread, the ice magic stone has certain scholarly value, so it's fairly prized. He thought to himself, it's surprisingly good stuff. Bill walked over and looked at the jailer. If ice magic is so inconvenient, why use it at all? He was unconscious. Isaac explained, because it's uncommon. Very few know about it. It's hard to distinguish from blunt force injuries, and because the stone melts, it leaves no trace, making this magic perfect for stealthy murders. That gloomy, terrifying expression made Bill freeze. He whispered, "You don't intend to finish them off?" At that moment, two others had discovered them. Who are they? How'd they get out? Bill still wondered. Even if you kill them, they'll be replaced soon enough. He hid behind him. But won't they still end up doing those jobs? Isaac replied as he moved. That's exactly why I keep them alive. The two who approached were knocked out. His brow twitched slightly. The one I truly want to kill. Another unfamiliar set of footsteps appeared in view, and their alertness began to rise. The massive form of NEAs approached alone. He looked at them suspiciously. You, Bill cried out in panic. NEAs, he hurriedly accused. Young master, he's the leader of that gang. He's delusional, tearing people apart with his bare hands. Isaac asked again, really? But Isaac was not worried. Anyway, it saves me the trouble of searching. The water orb began to emit a faint glow, and then an ice spike was formed. He directed it and launched it toward the man. NEAs widened his eyes as if about to be impaled. Unexpectedly, he swung his arm and deflected it. Bill exclaimed in astonishment. He blocked ice with his bare hands. Isaac was somewhat surprised too. You got some strength. Which tribe are you from? He immediately scolded irritably. Is now the time to praise him? What'd I do now? I'll be torn to pieces. Suddenly, NEAs spoke up. Hey you. He chuckled lightly and cheerfully. You lot of goods, right? I was worried I didn't have enough for a bath. Lucky me. NEA's gaze landed on Isaac. And a mage too. You'll be excellent material for my dark magic. Hearing that, Bill began to panic. Wait. Spare me. It wasn't me. He slowly reached out his hand. He clutched his head in fear and begged. I'm just an ordinary person. Suddenly, his finger froze. Bill blinked, opened his eyes in confusion. The block of ice behind him shot out a long ice spike, piercing through his chest and striking his eye. Dazed. The ice he had blocked earlier. At that moment, Isaac still held his pose, acting nonchalant. NEAs coughed up some blood. Seeing him collapse, he finally called to Bill. Isaac looked into his eyes and declared, From now on, you're the leader of this place. You know what you need to do, right? His face went rigid. His hand tightened around the knife. Then Bill let out a scream and ran forward. Isaac stood there with a slightly troubled expression. He closed his eyes and thought to himself, everyone has to do things they don't want to do at least once in their life. It happens to everyone. Annette's words echoed in his ear. You probably won't be able to redo or erase it. It will haunt you and leave traces for the rest of your life. Young master. At that time, she wiped his bloody hand and said, Then you'll be left with only two choices. One is to bear the shame of that guilt. The other is to try to live for that person. Isaac's face carried a deep restraint. He recalled earlier events. Back then, Annette, weighed down by guilt over losing her friend Clara, gave him that advice. Ahead, the jailers had caught sight of him. Bill threatened them. Give me a cup of water, you bastard. He told himself, but I don't need to hear that advice a second time. The wheels rolled and moved. On the carriage were Annette and the other maids. Though her clothes were soiled, her eyes still shone bright. Annette walked toward the castle, because in this life Annette would not lose her friend. Hilda cheerfully brought it up. Have you heard? Nobles from the south are looking for women from outside the city. Hearing that, Clara couldn't help but be curious. Why is that? She wondered if the women in the city were unattractive, so they sought beautiful women outside to marry. She also began to have her own thoughts. Should I go south? Hilda half covered her mouth and said mysteriously, I've looked into it a bit. Her cheeks flushed slightly. Someone could take me to the south for a bit of money. Annette, sitting quietly, was suddenly startled by the question. Hilda, Annette, do you want to come? But she declined. Probably not. I still need to care for my father. Now, Annette stood in the study reporting, "That was the last time I saw Hilda and Clara. We never saw them after that." Isaac thought to himself, just as Bill suspected. He asked again, "Were you kidnapped while looking for them?" Annette nodded in confirmation, her expression heavy. "When I found them in the sewers, they were truly insane." Her voice was desperate. "If I had stayed there a few more days, I probably would have gone mad too." Isaac sympathized with that. It was understandable. He remembered that chilling scene, where people were either sold or eaten. "I'm 70 years old. What chance do these young girls have?" Suddenly Annette confessed, "Actually, I could have run away." Recalling it made her uncomfortable. The iron gate that used to lock me up was broken. At that moment, Annette stood stunned before the bars. Suddenly, a soft sob came from beside her. She turned and saw Clara with her hair hanging in disarray. Annette couldn't help but be shaken deep inside. "If I had stayed a few more days," her hands trembling on the bars, she left Clara behind. Hearing that, Isaac's eyes also grew heavy with pain. Annette continued, "If so, I may have been the one to lead my friend to her death. That's what happened." He expressed understanding and gratitude. "It must have been hard for you to recall those memories. Thank you for telling me." She hesitated, looking a little flustered. "There's one thing I'm still wondering about." He asked curiously, "What's that?" She recounted that when the bandits returned us to the manor, Clara and I were very happy. Annette remembered that time, but bit her nails nervously. "No, if I return to the manor, if I go back, I will." Hearing that, Isaac looked puzzled. "If she goes back, will she die?" She replied helplessly, "Yes. It seems it's not just that she's afraid of punishment." He rubbed his chin and considered seriously. "I think I understand. I'll look into it." Annette smiled and watched him for a moment, then suddenly covered her mouth and giggled. "Rosa said perhaps the bandits suddenly released us because of you. Young Master Annette is teasing nonsense, huh?" Isaac folded his arms helplessly and thought, "She's perceptive," she added. "But it does make sense. You're the only one who pays attention to servants like us, young master." He was a little stunned, surprised by that remark. Isaac's blue eyes widened. Then he softly called Annette. Isaac said sincerely, "Thank you. I'm glad you think that." He was about to say more, but stopped. "All right, forget it. We'll talk later." Not fully understanding, Annette didn't ask further. Yes, I'll go now." The door to the room slowly closed. Isaac stretched his arms forward comfortably, and his face couldn't hide a sense of relief. Isaac thought of Annette. "I found an unexpected talent. Teaching her magic might be worth a try." That day, sunlight streamed through the castle as whispers spread. "Have you heard about the maids who just returned?" The maids huddled together, whispering. They should have been fired. But now young Master Isaac has taken them back. "I heard he had a big argument with the head steward over it." "Why would he go that far over servants?" "Don't tell me he fancies them." "The young master is at an age to notice women." Bill carried a tray into the storeroom, carefully setting his head down. At that moment, a figure approached. Jordan called softly, "Boss Bill." He brushed the dust off his hands. Bill frowned in displeasure. "Damn it. I told you not to call me that." Bill, the new boss of the criminal gang. Earlier, while fleeing, Isaac had told him, "This sewer is always full of vagrants. Even if we clear out one group here, another will rise sooner or later." He advised, "Instead of doing that, wouldn't it be better to keep them under control and manage them?" Bill thought to himself, "He planned this from the start. That's why he forced me to sign the contract, right?" He clutched his head, grinding his teeth in anger. "Now if there's a dispute or revolt, won't my neck be the first to be broken?" Then he settled his mood and sat down. Bill began asking about the situation. "Did NEAs only place you in the manor?" He answered, "Yes, boss told us to keep an eye on the manor." Hearing that, he snorted, "That NEAs always post people inside noble houses. Seems he's not just a crazy bastard after all." Jordan added, "And the boss always prepares a tribute." Bill frowned. "Tribute? What tribute?" He explained, "The tribute is offered to the knights around this time of year. The reason we stay holed up in this dump is because those knights are backing us." He looked shocked. "Knights are backing you?" A few days later, in Isaac's bedroom, he manifested a fireball in his hand. Then Isaac swung hard and hurled it forward. His emerald pupils gleamed brightly. The fire was only a feint. The real thing was the pillar of ice that followed. The orb targeted the wall ahead. Suddenly his hand clenched. The fireball vanished instantly, leaving only an ice spike that slammed into the wall. The ice shattered into pieces. When it was over, Isaac panted. After killing NEAs, his mana stream rose from 4 to 5. He understood he now needed to practice casting multiple spells in succession. With NEAs, he had only been lucky. Recalling earlier, NEA's familiarity with the terrain, the weaker guards, and his complacency, all those conditions let NEAs drop his guard and cost him his life. His eyes narrowed slightly in self-reproach. His hand clenched at his side, trembling. If not, I would have taken. Isaac lay flat on his back on the bed. Before he died, Jonas had told him many things, including matters about the von Goethe family's enemies. They were all optimized to deal with mages. He closed his eyes and told himself, there won't be another stroke of luck like with NEAs. I need to become stronger to protect von Goethe. The next morning, a loud call woke him. Isaac sat up. What's wrong? Lily and Hans entered. Morning, sir. Please get up. She nodded to Hans. Hans, the young master's clothes. He turned to fetch them. Yes. He put his feet on the floor and asked, why so sudden? Why do this? Lily carried a basin of water. What do you mean? She announced cheerfully. The master has returned. Hearing that, he couldn't help but startle. Isaac's heart raced a few beats. Outside the city gate, von Goethe rode up on horseback. Thinking of that, he asked absent-mindedly, Father's back. Returning to a moment from his past life, the wooden wall bore tally marks carved to keep track of the passing days. In a pitch-black room, a young man with long, light-colored hair sat at a writing desk. Using a quill, he was scribbling mysterious lines of text across the pages of a journal. The room's door suddenly burst open, and the Count stepped inside, holding a great sword in his hand. Astonished by the unexpected presence of his son, the master of the house turned his gaze toward the desk. The knight observed the person in the room with a look of surprise laced with suspicion. His son, Isaac, stood motionless facing his father in the middle of the room, creating a suffocatingly tense atmosphere. Isaac kept his eyes lowered toward his father's boots, while a few with shavings and fallen leaves drifted down onto the floor. As the Count helped his son in the dark room, carefully trimming away his silver hair, the father said that if this was truly what he desired, he would honor his choice without a single second of hesitation. He went on with a sad voice, assuring him that he could make sure everything would end peacefully and without pain. An older Isaac, his face lined with wrinkles, watched the scene with weary, sorrowful eyes. The Count kept carefully cutting his son's long hair while the boy remained completely silent. The father asked one last time if this was really what he wanted, and the young man firmly confirmed that it was. Moved, the Count hugged his son, telling him this would be the last time they ever saw each other. Resting his forehead against his son's in a tender gesture, he shared a deep, heartfelt farewell before turning to leave. The father said he would go ahead and wait for him, then walked out of the room, leaving the young man all alone in the dark. He told his son to come to him without holding any regrets in his heart. Fast forward to the present. Bright sunlight on a gorgeous day streamed through the large, beautiful windows of the mansion study. Isaac thought to himself that this was the first time they were face to face since that tragic day. The young man sat down and greeted his father, who was focused on reading important family reports. The Count said he had heard that his son recently helped out the sick kids in Black Goose Village. Surprised by the question, Isaac listened as his father revealed he had heard the story from Schiller, though he found it hard to believe. The boy humbly replied that he was just lucky enough to find a remedy for the children. He lied that he had stumbled upon the cure for that strange pneumonia inside an ancient book. The father tapped his fingers on the wooden desk, mulling over his son's story. Switching the subject, the Count asked how his physical condition was holding up after his recent training. Isaac answered with relief that he wasn't causing human explosions anymore, and that the doctor they brought in was indeed very skilled. Sunlight shone through the vibrant, gorgeous stained glass windows of the library, illuminating the sprawling study. Father and son continued their conversation calmly and peacefully inside the spacious study. Looking at his son seriously, the Count asked how things were going with his command duties and daily life at the castle. Isaac took the initiative to ask specifically about news from the crucial border fortress. The master flipped the question back to ask why his son was so interested, to which the boy replied that one day he would have to serve there himself. The count explained that the situation there remained unchanged, still infested with monsters, dark nights, and heavy snowfall. He added that the only major piece of news was that they had made a stop at the Scorched City on their way back. The young man remembered that the Scorched City was the exact place with that dangerous underground sewer system. The father pointed at his medicine vial and revealed that a horrific, extremely serious incident had taken place there. He mentioned that a private soldier had attacked his own commander, and Isaac deduced that the traitor must have been eliminated. The count shook his head and explained that, surprisingly, it was the wounded commander himself who demanded a court-martial. Isaac grew deep in thought, wondering why the commander would make such a suspicious move. Suddenly, the door swung open, and the count welcomed the new arrivals. Two knights stepped into the room, bowing respectfully to the young master and praising how much he had grown. Isaac darted an analytical, silent glance at the two men, trying to read their minds. One of the two knights, wearing a headband, offered him a friendly smile, completely oblivious to the boy's suspicions. The count allowed Fickle and Randolph to enter and politely dismissed Isaac to go get some rest. The boy immediately obeyed his father and left the room, closing the large, delicately carved wooden door behind him. Out in the hallway, he overheard the voice of one of the men demanding that a court-martial be convened as soon as possible. The man insisted that they needed to purge the traitor quickly to maintain military discipline. The count felt he was rushing things too much and asked Randolph if he agreed with the execution. Randolph calmly replied that he only followed direct orders from the commander-in-chief. The other man let out a sigh and scoffed, asking if he would really still say that even after the captain ripped off his ear. Outside, Isaac walked down the corridor in deep contemplation, trying to use his bright blue eyes to unmask the secrets of the two men. Analyzing the situation, he knew the secrets of the border were involved. He recalled that the insignia on their uniforms identified them as border guards. He cleverly deduced that the injured man named Randolph was the primary victim of that rebellion. All of a sudden, the sound of rushed, panting footsteps echoing across the red carpet caught the young master's attention. A servant came sprinting up in desperation, urgently pleading for the boy to follow him and leave the area. In a panic, he revealed that a dire emergency had just broken out inside the castle. The young master followed the servant through the outermost, secluded areas of the massive stone castle. When the protagonist asked what could possibly be so urgent, the servant said he had heard rumors about human trafficking in the sewers, to which the boy replied that he was already aware. Bill revealed that several people had taken bribes to turn a blind eye to the whole operation. Wearing a dead serious expression, the young master immediately asked who the culprits were. Sweating buckets from tension, the servant hesitated to expose the identities of those involved in the conspiracy. He blurted out that the guilty ones were none other than the Knights of Winterban, leaving the boy utterly stunned. The servant added that the body of one of their allies had recently been discovered at the entrance to the sewer. He said every single part of the victim's body had been severed, leaving behind only the pinky finger of the left hand. The young master asked what happened next, and the servant looked extremely hesitant. He confessed that a horrifying event had taken place earlier this morning. Panicking, he recounted that upon waking up, he mysteriously found that very same severed finger lying right on his bed. The enemy had sent a direct warning message through one of their subordinates. The threat made it clear that unless they delivered the money within 2 days, things would get far worse. The servant was spiraling, realizing his own finger would be the next one chopped off if they failed. He begged for help and blamed the boy for pushing him into such a dangerous leadership position in the first place. The young master kept a cool, calm face while cold-bloodedly analyzing the severity of the entire situation. He asked if anyone had witnessed the attack, and the servant replied that there was one witness. The witness said a flash of a blade gleamed right before their eyes, and everything was over in the blink of an eye. The only notable detail they could remember was that the attacker had a bandage wrapped around his head. The boy narrowed his bright blue eyes as he recognized that rather distinct physical feature. He simply said he understood the situation in a calm tone, which infuriated the servant because of his cold attitude. The young master started walking slowly, telling the servant in a calm voice not to worry. He asserted with absolute confidence that this man wouldn't die and that he would personally protect his life. He remembered that his father had returned with 2 knights who were demanding a court-martial. On their way back, they had stopped near the sewer area and killed a criminal to set an example for others. Every physical trait described by the witness matched that border knight perfectly. The young master gritted his teeth in sheer rage as he realized the sheer arrogance and betrayal of his very own guard detail. He marched forward with steady, resentful strides, stewing over the hypocrisy of those who called themselves border knights. He concluded that if all of this was true, they were nothing short of a cancer that needed to be carved out of the realm. The young master headed toward the dungeon area, his footsteps instantly drawing the attention of the guard on duty. The guard looked pretty surprised and asked what brought the young heir all the way down to the bottom of the dungeons. He asked point-blank about the presence of the prisoner sentenced to death for treason. In one of the darkest cells, the criminal was waiting, chained down by his terrible ultimate fate. The young master firmly declared that he was only here to talk to the prisoner. The chained man opened his eyes, revealing a sharp, terrifying gaze within the shadows. The boy revealed his purpose for coming was to confirm whether the knights were truly in bed with the bandits. Standing before the iron bars, he asked straight out if the man knew about Naya's notorious criminal organization. He added that he had heard about their involvement in that horrific human trafficking operation. Hearing this, the prisoner reacted instantly, clenching both fists with staggering strength. He glared at the young master with an exceptionally dark and hostile look. Maintaining total silence inside the cell, the young master closely studied the prisoner's features and felt his face looked quite familiar. He asked if the man knew about the secret connection between the city sewer system and his military commander. The chained man merely pressed his lips tight, refusing to answer any of the boy's questions. He violently rattled his heavy iron chains and gave a cold warning that he would only say this once. Suddenly, he lunged forward and grabbed the iron bars tightly, startling the young master standing right in front of him. The prisoner roared in fury that he didn't know a damn thing and demanded the boy get the hell out of there immediately. The boy continued to face his rage with absolute composure, showing no sign of fear or hesitation. Ignoring the loud shouts, the young master calmly asked what this rebel prisoner's real name was. He replied, "His name is Carlson," and the boy smiled upon hearing this crucial piece of information. The young master finally remembered his face, then asked if he wanted to keep lying, addressing him directly as Cullah. The prisoner's eyes widened in sheer terror as he realized his real name had been exposed. He recoiled in shock, causing the heavy iron chains to clank loudly against each other in the dark cell. The rebel glared at the boy in a state of profound shock and asked how on earth he could possibly know that secret name. The young man recalled that he had learned this name back when the kingdom's bloody civil war was at its absolute peak. That entire horrific power struggle had all started at the official royal succession ceremony. On that occasion, the second prince suffered defeat and decided to betray the motherland, joining forces with the empire to seize power. This terrible treason ultimately triggered a bloody clash right in the middle of the celebration. As the kingdom collapsed, the people rose up and started a rebellion led by none other than Kyle himself during the Civil War era. Now masquerading as someone else, he desperately asked how a mere child could know so many royal secrets. The boy answered in an incredibly calm voice that he had simply read that entire astonishing story in a history book. The book detailed and beautifully illustrated the lives of many notorious criminals across the continent. The work depicted the young leader as a military genius, destined to become the world's seventh sword master. Facing him face to face, the young master realized that the description of his talent was dead accurate. The prisoner radiated an impressive amount of mana, thanks to his harsh training routine. He swallowed hard, trying to picture the destructive power this warrior would unleash once he truly awakened. In his past life, the rebel had escaped his execution and furiously demanded to know how the young man could possibly know all of this. The boy told him to calm down and revealed that he also knew he was the legitimate son of a legendary warrior. The warrior began to tremble with tension and whispered, asking who this boy really was after all. Isaac asked how he could possibly serve in the military without recognizing the eldest son of the family that ruled this land. The prisoner asked if he had come to finish him off, but the boy said he couldn't care less about the life of a petty mercenary. He added that he wasn't interested in a deserter who had vanished off the map for over 10 consecutive years either. The man questioned the speaker's true identity, but Isaac told him he only wanted an answer to one single, serious question. With an intensely grave expression, the young master prepared to extract the crucial information he so desperately craved. He asked why the border commander was directly involved in a human trafficking ring. Christie stared at the burning candle and said that if he was the young master, he ought to know what was going on down there. Stepping forward with his chains clanking, he said, "That is the single biggest reason why I haven't said a damn word." The young master crossed his arms in thought, fully understanding the man's intense reluctance to cooperate with the investigation. He warned that the commander would pin all the blame on his head and turn him into a wanted criminal. He cold-bloodedly concluded that if he did that, the prisoner would never get to carry out his revenge plan. The word revenge instantly made the prisoner's chained hands tremble with pure hatred. He went completely silent, and the two kept staring at each other in a heavy, tense silence inside the castle dungeon. The boy decided to turn away, realizing this man wouldn't be as easy to manipulate as Bill the servant. He left the dungeon corridor, knowing he needed to take a completely different approach this time. The young master concluded that the only viable option left right now was to personally bait those traitorous knights out himself. A few drops of water began to fall, echoing softly off the damp walls of the sewer. Two dark-cloaked figures moved stealthily through the long, abandoned tunnel. One of the two intruders found it extremely odd that there wasn't a single trace of the Nuz gang's henchmen anywhere around. The hooded man pointed his index finger straight ahead, hinting that something was off at the end of the corridor. He was surprised to discover that all the iron cells that once held the kidnapped slaves were completely empty. They grumbled about the delayed bribe payments and being abruptly summoned to this meeting by their old bandit leader. The intruder opened a large, crude door, wondering if the new bandit chief intended to break their deal. Stepping through the entrance, the two criminals froze on the spot and gasped in shock. Bill the servant was wearing a forced smile, trembling uncontrollably while trying to hide his overwhelming panic. Shivering violently out of sheer terror, he motioned with his hand and politely invited the two guests inside. One of the two disguised knights immediately grew suspicious upon seeing one of Nars's henchmen dressed up like a mansion servant. He noticed the man was unarmed, but also caught the way the servant's legs wouldn't stop shaking from sheer nerves. The two criminals exchanged a quick, silent, complicit glance. Deciding to venture deeper into the dark room, they drew the sharp swords hidden under their cloaks and stepped fully into the secret lair. The hooded knight stepped into the pitch-black room with a cold gaze, trying to figure out who was lurking in the shadows. Up ahead, a mysterious figure sat with crossed arms at the head of a massive wooden table. He sneered, asking if the person here was Nars's new boss, the guy who summoned them without even offering a proper welcome. The man threatened, "That fake leader must think he's got 9 lives to dare treat us like this." The mysterious figure asked a single question that left both intruders completely paralyzed with shock. They instantly went on high alert upon realizing that calm voice belonged to a child. His face was lit by the candlelight. The boy calmly asked why they were acting so aggressively. One of the two knights started breaking out in a cold sweat under his hood as he clearly recognized the person sitting right in front of him. All of a sudden, one man dropped to his knees on the floor, leaving his companion standing beside him totally bewildered. The soldier asked what he was doing, but the kneeling warrior screamed out in desperation, ordering him to get on his knees right now. He barked at his partner, asking if he was an idiot for not realizing the grand, high and mighty identity of the teenager in front of him. The knight bowed his head in complete submission, declaring it a huge honor to meet him again in a place like this. The young master stood up calmly with a smirk, asking if they wanted something to drink. By calling them out by their real names, the young master sent Sir Fickle and Sir Randolph trembling in absolute horror amid the darkness. It all started a little earlier inside an isolated cabin nestled in the middle of a frozen forest. Inside, a man was excitedly holding a pouch full of gold they had just secured. He praised the late Near's skills for making money look so damn easy. The other guy held a gold coin in his hand, thrilled that this cash was enough to buy food and firewood for an entire month. Hearing that, his buddy chimed in that they could even trade in his old sword and still have plenty left over. He started tossing the gold coins back and forth to his partner while laughing out loud at their luck tonight. But their joy didn't last long when heavy footsteps and a mysterious boot appeared right at the doorway. A voice from the dark ordered them to freeze immediately, startling both criminals. Kyle appeared right in front of them, revealing that he had just eavesdropped on their entire conversation about the money. The man panicked, frantically trying to hide the money pouch on the table with desperate hand gestures. With a threatening glare, Kyle demanded to know what the hell they thought they were doing. Back to the present, Isaac calmly sipped his tea while listening to the explanation from the two guard soldiers. Sitting at the head of the table, the young master acknowledged that they did indeed have their reasons. He noted that his father was an extremely strict man who acted solely as the shield of the North. They admired his honor, but they couldn't just sit idly by while their own men starved. With no other choice, they decided to extort the bandits to make up for the resource shortage and protect the land. Fickle chimed in enthusiastically, claiming that was indeed their plan all along. The young master listened to everything with his eyes closed, getting ready to deliver his final verdict. Opening his sharp blue eyes, he cold-bloodedly pronounced his sentence, plunging Sir Fickle and Sir Randolph into total despair. Isaac declared that the punishment for their crimes was guaranteed death. He warned that they would be handed over to a court-martial, as his father would hand down the exact same verdict. Fickle lost his patience, slamming his hand on the table and asking if the boy really couldn't grasp their pain. The soldier glared back in fury, concluding that a brat like him would never understand their suffering. He asked Isaac if he had ever felt extreme hunger or watched his comrades fall in the freezing cold without proper weapons. The young master looked at him without a shred of emotion and replied flat out that no, he had never experienced any of that. Isaac stood up and said Fickle was just making endless hollow excuses for his own mistakes. The young master questioned him about the abduction of civilians, and Fickle was quick to pin the blame on Nears, claiming he acted alone. The boy kept looking at the two smugglers with an exceptionally stern and overwhelming gaze. Isaac asked whether he truly believed he hadn't crossed the same unforgivable line as those bandits. Fickle completely lost his mind upon realizing the young master wouldn't show them a shred of mercy. He clenched his fists in sheer rage, realizing how utterly foolish he was to expect empathy from this kid. The traitor ordered Randolph to get up so they could fight like true swords of go. With a vicious look in his eyes, Fickle drew his metal blade, ready to slay the young master on the spot. He pointed the sharp tip of his sword right at Isaac, swearing to cut down anyone who stood in his way. Randolph panicked at his partner's frantic attitude and begged him to reconsider. Fickle snapped back that the commander still had another young master, so they had to eliminate this threat right here and now. As tension thick enough to choke on filled the room, the boy continued to observe their reactions with ice-cold detachment. At that moment, Randolph drew his sword, and a powerful surge of blue spiritual energy began to swirl around the blade. The knight stepped forward with heavy strides, channeling his aura down into his boots. The young master tracked the soldier's movements, appearing somewhat curious about the situation. Fickle smirked, believing his partner had finally decided to help him cut the boy down. He focused all his attention on attacking Isaac, completely oblivious to what his comrade was actually about to do. Randolph looked at his old friend with deep sorrow, wondering how things had ever come to this. He felt nostalgic, remembering that initially every single action they took was genuinely for the good of Go. But he came to realize that the path they were walking had grown far too dark. Hesitating to wield his blade, the soldier lowered his head, wondering if they could even call this loyalty anymore. Randolph bit his lip hard as he made an agonizingly difficult decision regarding their fate. He stood up to face his friend and asked if he still remembered the oath they had taken long ago. The man recalled their pact. If one was to be the sword, the other would serve as the shield. Randolph remembered Carlson's advice that a flawless sword capable of cutting through anything without breaking was a true masterpiece. But he understood that the situation had completely shifted once the warrior veered off his original path. He warned that if this masterpiece developed a mind of its own, it would eventually turn into a wicked, terrifying blade. Fickle was utterly shocked when his own ally blocked him, demanding to know what the hell he thought he was doing. The two brothers-in-arms began trading fierce blows as their blades clashed with violent force. Randolph confessed that he could now only see the painful truth. Having lost an ear, he screamed at Fickle that the prisoner Carlson was dead, right about the rot devouring them from the inside out. Fickle broke out in a cold sweat as he realized the comrade who had survived countless battles alongside him had truly turned his back on him. He tried to persuade Randolph to stop this madness, warning that the young heir would take his life. Randolph resolutely replied that if it came to that, it was merely a tragedy they had brought upon themselves. He decided to lay it all out clearly once and for all, hurling the harshest truths right into his former comrade's face. In the heat of their fierce clash, he slapped Fickle with the harsh reality that the money was never meant solely for the soldiers. He asked if the traitor had really squandered that vast fortune out of genuine concern for the territory's prosperity. The battle reached a brutal conclusion, and silence descended over the room, once more following the decisive blow. Back in the dungeon, Randolph explained to Isaac that this was the very reason Carlson had chosen to act in the past. That night revealed they had only intended to murder the prisoner to shut him up, but ended up being bested by him instead. Isaac listened to everything with cool composure, disdainfully concluding that they were simply no match for that warrior. The soldier admitted that Carlson could have easily finished them off right then and there if he wanted to. Instead, he merely sliced off Randolph's ear as a lesson and willingly allowed himself to be captured without putting up a fight. Crossing his arms, Isaac asked if he expected to escape Carlson's punishment just because he felt a bit guilty. Randolph lowered his head in sorrow, falling into absolute silence. Confronted with this reality, he trembled with anxiety and confessed in a hushed voice that he was terrified of the future waiting for him. The man wondered what would become of his beloved family if this whole tale of treason were exposed. Isaac gave him a stern look and said a knight should understand the consequences better than anyone. Randolph shuddered in panic at the boy's coldness, feeling the crushing weight of his past choices. Over in the corner of the room, Bill the servant was lugging the bag containing Fickle's corpse, desperately trying to figure out a way to escape. Isaac kept his eyes fixed on the prisoner and began devising a strategic plan to handle the situation. He called out to Sir Randolph in an authoritative tone that instantly commanded the knight's attention. The young heir asked point-blank if he was willing to atone for his severe crimes through an alternative route. With the knight's acceptance, the official narrative of the event began to be rewritten by the young master. The new version clearly stated that Randolph and Fickle had only dealt with Nears to secure emergency supplies for the troops. The report indicated that Fickle had acted alone out of pure greed, running the smuggling ring and abducting the mansion's maidservants. It also noted that when his plan fell through, the traitor tried to sell Isaac to foreigners and used the boy as a hostage, but his wicked plot was foiled just in time thanks to the heroic actions of a key figure. The official report declared that the loyal knight Randolph was the very hero who saved the heir and neutralized the criminal. Because of this, the entirety of those horrific crimes was pinned squarely on the deceased Fickle. The traitor's corpse was put on public display in the town square, before the eyes of the populace, as a warning to all. Cloaked in a dark robe that concealed his face, Randolph bore witness to the punishment dealt to his former comrade. The knight walked quietly through the village streets under the watchful eyes of the surrounding townsfolk. Afterward, Isaac met his father inside the opulent, majestic parlor of the Go family mansion. As he sipped warm tea, the boy thought to himself that the severe shortage of resources was the true root cause behind the betrayal. This dire lack of basic necessities was the harsh, ruthless reality the Go family had to face every single day. They guarded the northern border and received annual tax cuts from the royal family, which served as their primary source of income. However, the major issue was that these royal tax funds had been dwindling significantly year after year. Even so, the Go family could neither complain to the king nor build up their own wealth independently. All of this misery was the result of Zeke von Go's actions, the mad mage who had reduced the imperial capital to ashes in the past. Their ancestors' cursed legacy had ruined the family's reputation and honor forever. Since no one could defeat the insane sorcerer, the king submitted to the emperor, and Zeke was ultimately slain by a knight. In the aftermath, the kingdom was reduced to a vassal state, and the Go family was stripped of their ducal title, demoted down to mere counts. Banished to the barren northern lands, any attempt on their part to hoard wealth would be viewed with extreme suspicion. The royal court would treat it as high treason, making the preservation of the status quo their safest path to survival. Nevertheless, Isaac calmly reasoned that this hasty conclusion might be a massive mistake on their part. The boy warned his father and the advisors that this outdated mindset was nothing more than a groundless assumption. The Count's eyes widened in astonishment as he realized the sheer boldness and brilliant intellect behind his son's words. Isaac explained that the kingdom's finances were worsening by the year, and the shield tax funds would inevitably keep shrinking alongside them. He asked whether the king was truly suspicious or simply relieved to see the Go family sustaining themselves. The young master decided to lay it straight, exposing the undeniable truth regarding the territory's true financial predicament. Isaac maintained that the real hurdle was never a royal ban, but rather the simple fact that they had never come up with a solution. Isaac reminded them that they were completely surrounded by barren lands and dangerous hostile forces. The Count fell into deep thought over his son's points, resting his chin on his hand. He conceded that the boy's idea had merit, but demanded he bring something concrete to the table to resolve the crisis. The head of the house clasped his hands together and cautioned that such a proposal was only as good as the actionable plan behind it. With a sharp gaze, he asked straight out if the boy actually had it in him to deliver this saving answer. Isaac held his ground firmly, his bright blue eyes signaling that he knew exactly what needed to be done. The young heir reached out his hand and declared with absolute conviction that they needed to act without a single moment of hesitation. The boy revealed that the very first crucial turning point was to decisively sever all ties with the old church. He explained that the church's oppressive dogmas were actively stifling the family's growth and preventing them from generating real wealth. The Count tensed up at the daring proposal, warning that the Vatican wouldn't just sit back and take this rebellion lying down. The boy clenched his fists with resolve, agreeing that this was precisely why they needed the absolute perfect excuse. Isaac let out a sly smirk, assuring him that he already had the ideal method to manufacture an airtight pretext. Facing that impressive revelation, the Count turned to Schiller, seeking his wise counsel. The head butler took a sip of tea, wondering if all these brilliant ideas truly originated from Isaac's mind. Schiller offered his praise with genuine admiration, remarking that it was hard to believe the boy possessed such vast wisdom while still struggling with his mana. Impressed by how events were unfolding, the Count stood up from his armchair to observe his son's next moves. Through the mansion window, he watched Isaac casually strolling through the garden alongside his new allies. The boy walked with Kyle, discussing preparations to permanently weaken the church's grip. The Count took in the scene from afar with a contemplative gaze. Proud of his heir's early maturity, he placed his hand against the cold glass, pondering the bright destiny awaiting their family. Schiller maintained his usual elegant composure while observing his master's quiet reflection. The conversation between father and son drew to a close, leaving behind a distinct sense in the air that sweeping changes were just around the corner. A few days later, south of the scorched city, a mysterious carriage rolled down the road heading toward church. The vehicle came to a sudden halt in front of the ancient temple. While a hooded figure waited patiently, a man clad in a dark cloak holding a glowing lantern stepped out to greet the guests from the carriage. In a somber tone, the hooded figure spoke the secret password to initiate their forbidden negotiations. The coachman slowly climbed down, keeping his guard up as he listened to his cult ally's password. The visitor delivered the second half of the chilling passphrase, confirming his identity for the secret rendezvous. The man with the lantern nodded in approval upon realizing he was dealing with the right partner. He ordered them to bring out the promised cargo immediately so they could commence the terrifying dark ritual. Two hooded figures dragged a tightly bound silver-haired boy out from the carriage. The boy was shoved roughly by the henchman, unable to fight back with his hands bound tight by rope. The leader asked if this fragile boy was truly the noble offering they had promised for the ritual. He brought the lantern close to the hostage's face to personally verify the victim's identity. The man let out a twisted, horrifying smile, savoring the victory of their ruthless abduction. The light-haired boy was gagged and kept quiet, showing no signs of panic in front of the cultists. The kidnapper ordered the servant to produce the true, precious reward promised in their deal. He arrogantly assured them that the terrifying goddess of fire would welcome this noble sacrifice with open arms. The group began guiding the young victims deeper into the dark temple, where they were set to perform the ritual. An old woman wearing a dark cloak welcomed the party, declaring that everything was proceeding strictly according to the goddess's will. She then turned around and, in a mysterious tone, instructed everyone to follow her into the ancient temple. Disguised as the coachman, Bill whispered in utter disgust about the dark cult they were about to step into. He quickly adjusted his tone, barked in a low voice, ordering the crew to keep moving forward without second thoughts. Kyle and Randolph trailed right behind the kidnappers, escorting young Isaac, who was merely pretending to be bound by ropes. The old woman held the bright lantern high to light the dark passage, once again urging everyone to follow close behind. The group descended the damp, dark stone stairs leading straight into the cultist basement. To maintain their cover before the cultists, Randolph rested a firm, authoritative hand on Isaac's shoulder. Cullough walked with a cold gaze locked in beneath his hood, fully prepared for whatever danger might arise. He scanned his surroundings with sharp focus, knowing that a single slip-up could cost everyone their lives. Rewinding back a few days to a private conversation over a fresh cup of hot tea, Kyle asked if his release was thanks to exposing the knight's crimes, and Isaac confirmed that was indeed the plan. The young master explained that rebellion was a capital offense, meaning the warrior had lost his rank in the army. Kyle calmly noted that he didn't even realize he had once held such a prominent position in the military. He paused briefly before raising the teacup to his lips. Intrigued by the boy's upcoming words, Isaac offered a friendly smile, asked if he recognized the tea, and revealed that the drink originated from his very own homeland. The warrior stared at his teacup in surprise, realizing the young master was well aware of his true foreign roots. Cullough set his cup down on the table and asked straight out why he hadn't reported him to the authorities. He reminded the heir that the boy knew full well his real name wasn't Carlson. Isaac admitted that he needed to keep it under wraps so he could leverage his talent at the opportune moment. Kyle started breaking out in a cold sweat at that revelation. Unable to parse what the boy was scheming, the young master advised the man to focus on his own objectives instead. Rather than trying to guess what others were thinking, he asked if Kyle was aiming for the life of that greedy old man who had destroyed the family he worked so hard to build. Isaac revealed the target's name was Vic Countlaus von Bottmer, leaving the warrior thoroughly shaken. Stunned, Kyle asked how the boy knew about this and why he wasn't stopping his quest for vengeance. The warrior explained that his target was a high-ranking noble in this kingdom, whereas he was merely an outsider. Isaac revealed that what he truly needed was a flawless blade possessing an iron will of its own. He promised that if the man lent his legendary strength, he would personally guarantee his desired revenge would be fulfilled. Kyle stared silently into space, realizing this was a deal he simply couldn't refuse. Back in the Scorched City, a priest was shouting at the top of his lungs in the middle of the street to draw the attention of the crowd. The fanatic roared at full blast about the horrific threats plaguing the region. He warned that dark magic was spreading like a plague, and that cultists were committing unforgivable atrocities. The priest ordered the crowd to seek salvation in faith rather than relying on a feudal lord who stood by doing nothing. Inside the carriage passing through the area, Kyle observed the man and commented on the old church's fanatics. Randolph complained that the church taxed the family heavily, yet continued to publicly smear Lord Gothia. Isaac cut off his two allies' discussion, stating that this topic wasn't their top priority at the moment. Randolph asked anxiously if the young master was absolutely sure about acting as bait for the ritual. The heir explained that the fanatics were chasing clout, and there was no bait more enticing in the north than himself. Kyle cautioned that they had no idea what deadly hazards were waiting inside the cultist's lair. Randolph underscored the horrific rumors regarding their brutal rituals and asked if it was truly worth risking his life. Isaac brushed off the warnings and asked if the old church was actually funding this dark cult. His blue eyes flashed with resolve as he pieced together the details of the plot in his mind. Kyle noted that the money they used to bribe the guards came directly from the cursed cult's coffers. The young master agreed, confirming this was the official story they would present to the kingdom. Isaac recalled that the coins were near-mint quality and minted by the royal family, something a mere bandit couldn't possibly possess. Randolph agreed that the origin of those gold coins was highly suspicious and pointed toward a powerful backer. Kyle speculated that only the old church could get their hands on that kind of money, but questioned if this alone proved a direct link to the cult. He wondered if the young master was really planning to cling to such a slim, meaningless thread of hope. The protagonist recalled that around this exact time, the situation had begun spiraling into chaos across the entire Northern Territory. The dark cult began ravaging the land from within through twisted rituals that left the populace paralyzed with fear. The old church profited the most from the widespread terror, pretending to hunt down members of the secret cult. They captured believers and burned them publicly on pyres in the village squares. Witnessing this fake divine mercy, the people began worshiping the church even more fanatically. From then on, Go's situation became unsustainable, and the nobility started complaining about the absurd burden. They grumbled that the church had doubled the tithe and even demanded men for construction projects while they were struggling just to survive. The territory began crumbling under financial strain and increasingly harsh demand from the old church. As a result, the lord of the land suffered severe hardship, and Isaac decided it was high time to make a clean break from their agreement. This brave stance was merely the first step toward protecting the people and the territory of Go. Back in the gloomy dungeon, the old woman slowly shuffled down the stone stairs, leaning on her old cane. She claimed everything started right here when the church burned the place down and only 3 saints survived the Great Fire. She added that the injured survivors saw God face to face, though Bill just wished she would shut her mouth once and for all. The woman pressed on with her twisted sermon, declaring that the human soul resides right inside human flesh. She explained that consuming this flesh would cause the soul to be reborn within them, inheriting all the wisdom and vitality of the sacrifice. At that moment, they bore witness to dozens of cultists feasting on forbidden body parts in a gruesome banquet to attain eternity. Bill was overcome with sheer horror as he witnessed the disgusting, barbaric acts unfolding right before his eyes. The old woman slammed her cane onto the ground and shrieked that the prophesied offering had finally arrived at the altar. The cultists whipped into a frenzy on the floor as she ordered them to devour the flesh to become as noble and pure as the victim. With a terrifying smile, the old woman presented Isaac as the flawless soul possessing every trait required for the feast. She unhinged her jaw unnaturally and commanded everyone to start devouring the boy's flesh right on the spot without an ounce of mercy. Bill lost his patience, kicking the old woman aside and saying he couldn't listen to any more of this crazy nonsense. He roared in frustration, asking Isaac how much more of this bizarre madness they had to endure in this cave. The knight stepped forward and began untying the ropes, which had only been fake restraints on the young master, to initiate the battle. Isaac took off his gag and breathed a sigh of relief, seeing that Bill had finally acted exactly as he expected. The young master calmly ordered his allies to only engage the fanatics who attacked them first. The fanatics backed away in panic, upon realizing that those victims were actually ruthless warriors. Isaac seriously warned his partners not to forget the true strategic plan that brought them to this place. The old woman on the ground screamed in hatred, promising that a terrible curse from the goddess would fall upon the intruders. Randolph cut her off with a precise blow to the face to permanently silence that annoying screaming. The knight pointed his sharp weapon outward and warned the other fanatics that anyone who dared to take a single step forward would be destroyed instantly. He assured them with a terrifying glare that he would take down any opponent before they could even feel the pain. Hearing that horrifying threat, most of the cultists panicked and fled, desperately trying to escape the place. Randolph was a bit surprised to see the entire gang desperately fleeing through the dark corridors of the dungeon. The henchmen ran so fast that in just a few seconds, the temple entrance was completely empty and silent. Kyle asked if they should chase after the fleeing enemies, but Isaac replied that their priority right now was to search the entire area. Randolph sighed wearily and concluded that these crazy fanatics were nothing but a chaotic joke. Kyle knelt beside the old woman who had fainted on the floor and calmly asked if she could stand up on her own. The old woman woke up in a daze, asking where she was and begging them not to hit her, making Kyle curious about her reaction. Randolph sarcastically asked if she had suddenly gone senile and made a snarky comment about her mental state. The old woman begged for forgiveness, mistaking Isaac for the deacon, but the boy just called her mother in a friendly way. The young master patiently leaned down with a gentle smile and asked where this old woman's real home was. A moment later, the group arrived at a humble wooden cabin located in the southern slums of the scorched city. Upon entering the house and looking up at the attic, the knights were stunned in sheer amazement at what they had just discovered. Right in front of them was a chest overflowing with a massive pile of sparkling, high-quality silver coins. They couldn't believe that a poor and humble old woman would hide such a massive fortune in her attic. Randolph pushed his greedy companions aside and asked if they were sure this money belonged to the royal family. Isaac nodded firmly, confirming that the loyal knight Randolph's suspicions were correct. The boy analyzed the coins very carefully and asserted that the official seal engraved on the metal belonged to the royal mint. He was thrilled that they had obtained evidence linking the cult to the church, but was interrupted by a knock on the door and a calling voice. Suddenly, the cabin door opened and someone loudly announced that they were entering the humble room. The newcomer's voice echoed throughout the house as he kindly asked about the old woman's condition. Up in the attic, Isaac's eyes widened in sheer shock as he recognized whose voice that was. The boy immediately realized that the person who had just walked in was an influential cleric from the old church. With a discreet smile on his face, the man used a friendly tone to ask if the ritual was a huge success. Sitting on the bed, the old woman broke into a cold sweat and hesitantly answered the man in front of her. Trying to hide her absolute panic, she trembled all over and managed to mumble a few disjointed sentences to distract the guest's attention. With terrified eyes, she stammered in fear and declared that demons had invaded the temple and destroyed everything. The woman loudly revealed that ruthless creatures had desecrated the sacred altar and wiped out all the cult's followers. In her panic, She begged for a divine miracle, while the confused cleric demanded a clear explanation about these demons. Barely able to breathe, she tried to play crazy by calling the man a deacon and fabricating an absurd story right there in the room. The old woman sobbed on the bed, saying her husband hit her and desperately begging for help. The cleric sighed impatiently at the charade, deducing that the old woman had completely lost her mind. However, a slight creak from the wood in the attic caught the man's attention and instantly put him on high alert. He whipped around with a suspicious glare directed at the wooden stairs leading up to the attic. The cleric observed the top of the stairs in the shadows, suspecting that someone was hiding up there. The man gathered magical energy in his hand and coldly warned that he had sensed the presence of an intruder in the house. He concluded in his thoughts that the old woman was no longer useful and their secret could not be allowed to leak. Therefore, he intended to burn down the evidence of corruption along with all the accumulated wealth in that filthy attic. Kyle observed the threat from above and warned that true demons often hide behind a facade of holy light. In the blink of an eye, Kyle appeared behind the cleric with his sharp blade pressed against the traitor's neck. Trembling and sweating in terror, the cleric tried to threaten the warrior, warning that the Vatican would avenge his death. Isaac began to slowly walk down the wooden stairs, commenting that he finally remembered the man's true identity. The young master smirked and sarcastically greeted the traitor as he approached him in the living room. The time shifted to the next morning at the majestic grand church in the city, where the deacon appeared tightly bound and under arrest. Tied tightly to a wooden chair with heavy ropes, the corrupt cleric had no way to escape. Crying in despair, the prisoner began to confess that the old church wanted to expand its influence in the territory. He revealed that to achieve this goal, the bishop had ordered them to create a fictional villain to terrify the public. As a result, the man created new doctrine and incited poor vagabonds to form that terrifying cult. The deacon bitterly admitted that this very scheme gave birth to the horrific cult that once terrorized the land. Randolph indignantly commented that this was the worst confession he had ever heard and asked what they were going to do next. Isaac kept a cold and thoughtful expression on his face, knowing that this confession was exactly the trump card he needed for his chess game. The boy decided that his advisor, Schiller, would take the prisoner to the grand church to begin formal negotiations. The tied-up cleric spat on the ground and laughed out loud, saying that the bishop would definitely punish the Go family severely, not letting him say another word. Isaac admitted that he was the one who orchestrated this entire plan. So if they wanted to collect any debts, just tell them to come here and find him. This left the fat guy completely, utterly dumbfounded. Night fell over the territory. In the silent dungeon, a lone candle burned, casting flickering shadows across the cold stone walls. The monk constantly stomped his feet on the ground out of sheer restlessness. The tied-up cleric broke into a cold sweat, thinking that his entire plan had collapsed overnight, all because of a kid. Suddenly, an unbearable, piercing pain stabbed right into the deacon's chest, making him groan in absolute agony. The man chuckled grotesquely and mocked that the young master was nothing but a descendant of barbarians. The prisoner assured him that divine justice would fall upon Isaac's sins before he drew his final breath. He felt his strength fading as he rambled on that the bishop would surely bring a fitting punishment down on the boy. With crazed and hateful eyes, the man used his last bit of strength to curse the entire Go bloodline. The cleric looked down at the stab wound on his chest in utter shock. Unable to believe that his time was up, he let out one last pained groan as the mysterious hooded attacker turned around and leaped away. The mysterious figure who had eliminated the deacon stepped out of the dungeon, with cold, silent footsteps. However, heavy footsteps blocked his escape route, and a resolute voice asked if the intruder was already planning to leave. Isaac appeared majestically at the dungeon entrance, holding a bright lantern to block the attacker's path. The hooded figure instantly stopped upon realizing that he had walked right into the boy's perfect trap. Isaac smiled coldly in the dark, commenting that it was a real shame they had to meet in such a tragic way. The young master revealed the hooded figure's true identity, calling the man Bishop Lavin. At the same time, the outside of the building had already been surrounded by a group of soldiers. Not far away, Kyle and Randolph were hiding in the treetops, observing everything. They chatted with each other. If the young master guessed right, then they're from the old church, aren't they? Exactly. Seeing things go south, they immediately came to silence him. I never expected the young master to predict this so accurately. Randolph looked toward the group, his eyes a bit thoughtful, and muttered, "The old church, huh? They've been making a fortune off Nears, yet neither I nor Fickle knew a damn thing about it." Wait, that's not entirely true. It's not that we didn't know. We knew damn well it was dirty money, but we just turned a blind eye and didn't ask any questions. Kyle shot him a sideways glance. Then he stood up and said, "Now that you know, just don't end up in a pathetic state like Fickle. You still have a family to protect." Those words seemed to wake Randolph up. His hands clenched tightly, full of determination. Seeing that, Kyle also nodded in satisfaction. "Let's focus on the mission. There are 13 of them in total. Clear them all out. Don't let anyone get in the young master's way." With that said, they drew the sharp swords hanging at their sides. Back inside the room, Lavin's cold voice rang out as well. "You don't seem very surprised to see me. Or is the Marquis's son just naturally special from birth?" he said while still keeping his familiar compassionate smile. But at that exact moment, Isaac's eyes went wide. An attack lunged straight at him. Fortunately, Isaac managed to dodge it at the very last second. It turned out the attack aimed at Isaac was a wooden stake. It was so powerful that it pierced right into the wall. Isaac immediately speculated. Did he use teleportation on those stakes? Or is that magic from a grimoire? Thinking that, he said, "I'm actually quite surprised. I never expected you to come here in person. Why do you look as thrilled as if you've just struck gold?" In response, Lavin also smirked. "Is that so? Honestly, I'm quite sad too. I didn't expect the deacon to fall into darkness so easily, but he was still grateful to me. After all, he did bring the seed of disaster straight to me." With that said, the man pulled another sharp stake from his side and hurled it straight at our protagonist with blinding speed. Isaac's eyes maintained their intense focus. He reached his hand forward, and in that split second, Isaac snatched the sharp stake, driving it deep into the stone floor. Lavin's face twisted in panic as things didn't go according to plan. "How can you use ice magic too?" he screamed. While Isaac simply said in a calm tone, "Who knows? Maybe I just sold my soul to the devil." Lavin's expression started to turn ugly, but then he regained a bit of composure. "Isaac, do you remember when you were just born? I was the one who performed your purification ritual. I wasn't happy at all. When you were brought into this world back then. Do you study history?" Isaac shrugged and replied, "Yeah, just like everybody else." Lavin stepped forward and said, "Then you should know that your very birth was a mistake. Most of the cultists here hail from the border tribes, savage barbarians who roam around, looting and causing trouble. And yet your father, Count Go, wanted to make peace with them. Then he even married a barbarian woman and had you. That marriage defied the will of heaven. So it's only natural that you were born cursed. You shouldn't have even existed in this world in the first place." Hearing that, a hint of anger flashed in Isaac's eyes. "That sounds incredibly grating, especially coming from the mouth of someone trying to take my life." Standing opposite him, Lavin kept his mocking smile. "Did you know those cultists used to use these stakes for human sacrifice rituals? What a bunch of barbarians. Today, you will die by their hands. That way, the tie between Go and those savages will end, and this land will be purified." With that said, several more sharp stakes started flying toward Isaac. Isaac also gathered magical energy into the palms of his hands. 2 sharp shards of ice materialized in his hands. Thanks to that, our protagonist easily blocked Lavin's attack. This made Lavin look flustered, thinking to himself, "This isn't ordinary ice. He's hitting every single flying stake with absolute precision. How is that even possible?" This was all thanks to what Isaac had trained in with Lucas during his past life. After being sent flying by Lucas, the protagonist panted heavily and said, "Lucas, let's call it a day. I'm completely out of breath." Lucas used a teasing tone. "Tired already?" Isaac fired back. "What do you mean, tired? It's been almost an hour." Lucas reached out and pulled Isaac to his feet while saying, "But your swordsmanship has definitely improved. Before, you couldn't even block one of my strikes, but today you managed to block 5 in a row." The protagonist shook his head slightly. "It's all thanks to your amazing teaching. Why don't you go register as a knight? Sticking around with me is a waste of your talents." He smiled and replied, "Come on now. My sword skills are only average at best. What's truly impressive is your imagination, young master." Snapping back to reality, attacks were constantly being launched at Isaac. However, Isaac blocked every single one of them. In the midst of the clash, he thought to himself, "Why did I suddenly remember his words?" Lucas didn't explain any further back then, but now I know exactly what he meant. This imagination is the product of all those days under house arrest. Because I couldn't see the outside world, my inner senses grew much sharper. During those long hours of daydreaming, I sparred with Lucas countless times. From visualizing magic I couldn't even cast, yet to painting a seemingly impossible future. It's those countless mental experiences that forged the person I am today. Opposite him, Lavin unleashed another attack. Seeing that, Isaac also swung his arm to counterattack. The two attacks collided in midair, creating a massive explosion. Isaac thought to himself, "Lucas, you truly are a great teacher." By this point, all the wooden stakes Lavin had brought with him were completely used up. However, Isaac didn't let his guard down in the slightest. "You must have more up your sleeve than just that, right? Making it to bishop, yet having to rely on a grimoire to throw stakes. You don't seem like a man of God at all." Hearing him say that, Lavin gritted his teeth in sheer fury. To avoid revealing my signature technique, I held back from using divine power directly. But now I have no other choice. He threw the book in his hand to the ground, focusing magical energy into his palm. "Open your eyes wide and watch. This is the divine power bestowed upon me. Holy fire." Isaac's eyes widened as he looked up and saw a massive blue fireball hovering in the air. However, that only left our protagonist even more puzzled. "This is holy fire?" Lavin nodded proudly. "Exactly. This purifying flame is something those mediocre mages couldn't replicate, even in their wildest dreams. With this, your ice crystals will evaporate in." Before he could even finish his sentence, Isaac cut in, "Are you talking about this?" In that very instant, an identical fireball appeared in the palm of his hand, leaving the fat guy extremely bewildered, completely unable to understand why. Leovonius seemed unable to accept reality and angrily growled, demanding, "How in the world did you create that flame?" Isaac replied in a perfectly calm voice, "It's quite simple. Just create fire and then compress it twice. That's all there is to it." This made Lavin feel even more incredulous. "Are you mocking me? Power doesn't work that way." In response, Isaac decided to enlighten the old man. "That might be true for the old church's power, but it seems I'm a heretic, because my magic is a dual-element system. That's also the only reason I can pull this off." As soon as he finished speaking, the flame in his hand suddenly burned more fiercely than ever before. Then it even shifted to a deep purple hue. Witnessing this scene made Lavin's eyes practically bulge out of their sockets. Absurd. How is that possible? There's no way such power would be granted to someone with filthy blood. Isaac extinguished the magic in his hand and said, "Oh well, maybe the gods are just a bit biased toward me." Those words completely froze Lavin's face. Both of his hands began to tremble. "That is pure blasphemy. I have trained this power for decades." With that said, he shot the fireball in his hand straight at Isaac with blistering speed. Meanwhile, the protagonist stood perfectly still, thinking to himself, "Decades? Is that what you said? As for me, I've been training it my entire life." His eyes turned ice cold. He slowly raised his hand forward. An even more terrifying pillar of purple fire blasted from his fingertips. It pierced right through the blue fireball and rushed straight toward Lavin, causing sweat to pour down his face like rain. Isaac calmly said, "Since I pity you, Bishop, I'll let you know the reason you have to die. And that reason is, the news of me knowing how to use magic getting out would cause a whole lot of trouble." Just like that, Lavin took a direct hit from the magic. And finally, his body was burned to a black char. As for Isaac, he coughed a few times, panting heavily after that devastating attack. Maintaining magic at this level for an extended period was still too much for him. The one who arrived was Kyle. He was supporting Randolph, whose entire body was covered in blood. His eyes widened slightly as he looked at the burnt pile of ashes in front of him and asked, "What the hell happened here?" Isaac turned to look at him with a hesitant look and thought to himself, "Unlike Bill, Kyle hasn't signed a contract. It's best to hide the fact that I know how to use magic." Thinking that, he made up an excuse. The deacon and the bishop argued, and as you can see, they killed each other. This story made Kyle feel a bit surprised. Is that really true? Isaac was equally suspicious and had no intention of asking any further. He thought to himself. Meanwhile, Kyle didn't ask any more questions and reported, "I've already cleaned up the holy knights outside." Isaac nodded, but then fell into deep thought and asked, "What about Randolph?" Kyle glanced at Randolph and replied, "He asked me to take care of his family." Time passed quickly. The sky was gray. Randolph's funeral was held. Even the head of the house was present to attend. In another corner, Randolph's wife and 2 sons were weeping in sorrow. From afar, Isaac quietly observed and asked, "How did Randolph die?" "At least we should let his family know." Kyle replied, "Those holy knights were very strong. But Randolph could still have survived if I had gone all out." Those words made Isaac fall silent for a moment. After a few seconds, he asked, "You mean you didn't do that?" "I had to play the role of an ordinary soldier until I killed that guy," Kyle replied. However, this made Isaac think differently, meaning you accepted to stay hidden until you got your revenge, even if it meant sacrificing the life of your close friend. On his side, Kyle continued to warn Isaac, "I'm saying this in advance so the young master can mentally prepare. If you fall into a similar situation later, I will still act in the exact same way." He spoke with an extremely serious expression. Isaac turned to ask, "Even if I'm the one who helps you get your revenge?" Kyle affirmed once again, "That's right. The day I reveal my full strength will only be that day." Isaac understood that the day he spoke of was the day he would settle the blood debt under the identity of Kyle, not Carlson. Thinking that, he just calmly said, "I understand. Both you and I are people who have no qualification to attend a proper funeral." Time continued to pass. The scene shifted to the inside of a carriage. At this moment, Isaac and his father were having a short conversation. His father spoke first. "The preparation for the negotiation with the Holy See is complete. In exchange for us turning a blind eye to the bishop's sins, they will no longer collect the 10% tax, and they won't send a new bishop here either. However, it's unclear how long they'll keep their word. But at least for now, Go has escaped the mess of the old church, just as you calculated." Isaac nodded slightly. Inside, he felt a little bit of joy. Good, the obstacle has been cleared. It's time to prepare for the next step. On his side, Count Go continued, "The next time Carlson comes, I'll praise him properly. For now, let's talk about something else." He took a deep breath to calm himself down. He clasped his 10 fingers together and admitted, "I have absolutely no idea about anything. From how brutal the cult's ritual was, the fact that they brought 13 holy knights, to the fact that the bishop himself was the founder of that twisted cult to carry out such depraved acts. I'm completely in the dark. While you know everything, and I had no idea at all. What on earth did you go through? Before I went to Winterban, you were just a weak and rather peculiar child. But now I can't even guess what you're thinking anymore." Isaac also fell silent in the face of this confession. After a few seconds, he spoke up, "I'm simply considering the interests of our family." At that moment, he seemed to return to the old Isaac, the one who witnessed the decline of the family. Walgo quietly looked at him and said, "Isaac, I married Adele when I was 14 years old. At that time, we didn't even share a common language. From culture, habits, to ways of thinking, we were completely separated from each other. She was a wild girl. That period of time was hell for both of us, because we were just tools brought out to extinguish the war between the two sides. But precisely because of that, Adele and I promised each other that we would never turn our children into tools of the family. Although the true meaning of this life remains a mystery, we promised to help you live your own lives. A little bit, I thought I had to wait for you to grow up a little more before telling you this. Who would have thought you would mature so quickly? Looking at your face, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm telling you these things, right? He reached out to pat Isaac's head and advised, it means you can completely live carelessly and just be an ordinary child. Isaac quietly pursed his lips and nodded in agreement. Yes. Another development in the forest, a large man was rushing to run and report to the leader. Boss, there's a letter sent from Go. The bald guy was startled. What letter? Give it here. Let me see. He said that and snatched the letter, throwing it straight into the campfire in front of him. I'm running out of firewood. This comes a great time. Subordinate panicked and shouted, Wait, why are you burning it? The boss roared, Shut your mouth. That pile of scrap paper isn't worth a single coin, no matter how many times they send it. Those people will never become the masters of this land. Arthur called Isaac and Carlson over, saying that both of them had done a great job. He summoned them to praise them for their efforts. He first turned to Carlson and asked if he had any wishes. Carlson replied that he wanted to continue serving the young Master Isaac. Arthur pointed out that if Carlson returned to Winter Band, he could be promoted to squad commander. Carlson calmly replied that instead of pursuing a title, he wanted to find a place where his skills could be used most effectively. Tapping his fingers on the table in thought, Arthur muttered to himself before agreeing that if that was Carlson's wish, then it should be as he wanted. Turning to Isaac, Arthur remarked that he had no objections either. Isaac replied that he would feel more at ease if Carlson served as his bodyguard. Arthur accepted the request, officially appointing Carlson as Isaac's personal bodyguard and granting him 200 denarii. Carlson respectfully thanked him. Arthur then turned to Isaac with a serious expression and said it was now Isaac's turn, telling him to state what he wanted. Isaac mused and replied that he wanted the lands of Fickle. Looking at him in astonishment, Arthur asked if he was talking about Winfeld. The scene shifted to a wooden sword sparring match, where two wooden swords clashed with a ringing sound. Isaac was gradually overwhelmed, lost his balance, and fell backward. Carlson remarked that Isaac had blocked the blows quite well, but still lacked the strength to stand firm. After wiping the sweat from his face, Carlson looked at Isaac sternly and asked why he suddenly demanded to spar. Isaac replied that he intended to take over Winfeld. Carlson asked what Isaac planned to do after getting Winfeld. Isaac answered that Carlson didn't need to know much, just that it would help him carry out his revenge. Hearing those words, Carlson was momentarily startled. The two of them got back in a stance. Isaac tightened his grip on the wooden sword and rushed forward with cold eyes. In his heart, Isaac resolved that it was time to start over. As Isaac launched his attack, Carlson was surprised and thought to himself that he had heard Isaac had never learned swordsmanship. Yet his sword technique was strangely graceful. Continuing to fight, Carlson secretly observed that Isaac's strikes were neither particularly sharp nor particularly fast, but both offense and defense were extremely precise. While blocking blows for Isaac, Carlson thought that such a level could only be achieved if Isaac had been holding a sword since he was 5 or 6 years old. However, after being pushed back with trembling hands, he also realized that Isaac's physical strength was too weak for that to happen. Isaac tried to continue fighting even though he was near exhaustion. Yet every time he fell, he forced himself back up. Witnessing that scene, Carlson wondered how such a thing could happen. Carlson's gaze gradually changed. He no longer looked at Isaac like a child. Tightening his grip on the sword, he leaped into the air. Sensing danger, Isaac hurriedly retreated, but Carlson unleashed a decisive blow. The two wooden swords collided with a heavy cracking sound as Isaac trembled and desperately defended. Suddenly, Carlson intentionally relaxed his grip, letting the sword swerve to the side. Isaac lost his momentum, and at that very moment, Carlson delivered a powerful kick to Isaac's ribs. Isaac cried out in pain before falling to the side. Carlson coldly remarked that with Isaac's current level, it wasn't even enough to survive in Winfeld. Isaac protested that precisely because of that, he was asking Carlson to teach him. Carlson's face grew even colder as he said that Isaac could use magic, right? He recalled Isaac's story about the deacon and the bishop killing each other and concluded that the deacon wasn't actually strong enough to defeat the bishop. Isaac immediately asked how Carlson knew that. Carlson explained that when a person reaches a certain level, whether it's magic or aura, they can accurately gauge the opponent's strength. Isaac smiled faintly and asked if Carlson was really comfortable admitting he had reached that level. He also said he thought Carlson was hiding his true strength. Carlson frowned and replied that Isaac had known the truth from the moment he wiped out the Holy Knights. After hesitating for a moment, Isaac explained that since there were no prying eyes around, he could speak directly. He admitted that using magic would definitely make things easier for a while, but it would politically isolate the Goethe family because his unique physical constitution was identical to that of a certain 10th tier mage. Curious, Carlson asked if Isaac was talking about Zeke von Goethe. Isaac confirmed that was correct. He explained that Zeke von Goethe was the only 10th tier mage recorded in history, and historical records stated that he also suffered from mana explosion. According to those records, Zeke collected magical relics from all over the continent and wore them on his body, seemingly overcoming his physical constitution in his own way. Isaac then asked what that meant for himself. Carlson helplessly replied that the fact Isaac could use magic was proof that he had also overcome that constitution, just like Zeke von Goethe back in the day. Isaac lowered his head and urged Carlson to think about the situation. He pointed out that over a century had passed since Zeke von Goethe burned down the royal capital. Yet a person with the exact same constitution was born once again in the Goethe family and also overcame it. Isaac asked if Carlson truly believed the royal family and other noble houses would leave the Goethe family alone. In his heart, Carlson concluded that they certainly would not. Instead, they would either use the Goethe family for political gain or assassinate Isaac. Isaac slowly stood up and asked Carlson if he regretted joining the Goethe family. Carlson nodded slightly, admitting that he did regret it, but stated that he had never turned back. He warned Isaac that the one who would truly regret it was Isaac, since he was the one who demanded the sparring match. Isaac immediately panicked and protested that they should wait a bit because he thought the match was over. Isaac was sitting in a carriage. Schiller asked if leaving Winfeld without saying anything was really okay, remarking that Hans and Gisela would definitely be sad. Isaac replied that Schiller wasn't usually the type to worry about such things and asked why he brought it up now. Schiller answered that it was because Isaac cared. Without looking back, Isaac thought to himself that when he burned with the purple flame, he had felt his body could barely endure anymore. He admitted to himself that he still couldn't completely control the mana explosion. He then explained aloud that he would rather have Hans and Gisela be sad than dead, because he didn't want even the smallest possibility of them losing their lives. Elsewhere, Carlson rode his horse through the desolate land. He explained that Winfeld, formerly known as Fickle Territory, had become a land polluted by monster blood, where nothing could sprout or grow. He added that this was also the first territory to face any enemy that managed to cross Winterband. Hearing this, Isaac thought to himself that this description matched the final state of the territory he had witnessed in his past life. Suddenly, Isaac's eyes widened as the ground began to shake violently. Schiller shouted that a horn had sounded, which was the signal indicating monsters had appeared. A guard outside immediately opened the carriage door and urgently warned the young Master Isaac that monsters had appeared, ordering him not to go outside but to stay put inside the carriage. The moment Isaac saw the person standing outside, he was astonished and cried out in disbelief, asking why Hans was. Amidst the snowy white forest, the carriage convoy plodded forward. Isaac suddenly called out to Hans. He wondered why the old butler was so stubborn as to follow him into such a dangerous place. Hans could only sigh in silence. Isaac's gaze was filled with suspicion as he stared at Hans. Hans scratched his head and explained, claiming he was stalked and harassed day and night by someone, which was why he had to tag along with the young master. Carlson snapped back to attention and loudly declared that he would protect Isaac at all costs. Isaac could only sigh in exasperation, bringing a hand to his forehead at his subordinate's excessive enthusiasm. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out as a giant dark shadow landed on the snow right next to the convoy. A pack of hellhounds ambushed them. Carlson immediately shouted, ordering the guards to form a combat formation. Ghoulish, glowing red eyes gradually emerged from the darkness. They were hellhounds, a notorious species of magical beasts specializing in hunting prey in the Windfelt region. Bessemer stated that these creatures were very smart, always prioritizing the elimination of the weakest targets first. A powerful stomp kicked up a blinding cloud of snow across the area. Bessemer drew his sword, his eyes never leaving the enemy, preparing for the clash. He concentrated intensely, watching for any openings in the pack of monsters. Despite the interception, a giant hellhound lunged straight toward Isaac's carriage. Carlson screamed a warning. Before Carlson and Isaac could recover their senses, the dark shadow blanketed their vision. Isaac quickly grabbed Hans by the shoulder and pulled him back to protect the old man. The monster's sharp-toothed maw crashed straight into the interior of the carriage cabin. A loud shattering crash echoed out, and the carriage was completely destroyed in the blink of an eye. Isaac and Hans were hurled onto the cold ground, surrounded by debris. Isaac cried out in pain. He tried to endure the pain, crawling up amidst the ruins. Isaac looked around in panic and called out Hans's name in vain. He feared he would lose someone important to him once again if things kept going this way. Suddenly, a sound came from beneath the pile of broken wood. Isaac strained his eyes to look. Hans laboriously crawled out from the rubble, his mouth still groaning continuously from the impact. He weakly replied to Isaac that he was still here and was fine. Carlson knelt on the ground, the wound on his face dripping bright red blood. Isaac unexpectedly gave Carlson a direct punch to the face for letting himself get injured. Getting punched hard, Carlson managed a bitter smile. He admitted that young Master Isaac's punch was indeed much stronger than he had thought. Isaac clenched his fist, looking at Carlson with a gaze full of reproach. Carlson froze, lowering his head and not daring to look straight at Isaac. The guard sincerely apologized for letting the young master fall into a dangerous situation. Isaac let out a sigh of relief upon seeing that both Hans and Carlson were safe. He told Carlson to get up. Bessemer led his horse closer. Isaac asked if he had already dealt with the magical beast from just moments ago. He wondered about the rest of the monsters in the pack. Bessemer stammered, about to say something. Isaac heard roaring battle cries echoing from afar. He was curious about what was happening. Not far away, a chaotic battle was unfolding. The Hellhound pack was completely overwhelmed by a group of strangers. Bessemer stated that those were the warriors of the Windfelt region. It seemed they had finished cleaning up the monsters for the convoy. Isaac froze upon realizing these warriors were fighting completely bare-chested. A giant Windfelt warrior swung his axe, cleanly slicing through an oncoming hellhound. The guy slaughtered the monsters while laughing heartily, a terrifyingly mad look. Watching the bloodthirsty warriors tearing the monsters apart, Isaac could only blurt out that they were a bunch of lunatics. An incomprehensible madness right in the middle of this harsh land. Bessemer explained that the big guy standing over there was the commander of the Windfelt camp. Most of the soldiers here, including him, came from a fierce warrior tribe. Hearing this, Isaac could only mumble that name to himself. A bare-chested giant, wielding an axe stained with the blood of magical beasts, strolled toward Isaac's group. Hans hurriedly clarified that he was the family treasurer, not any relative of this giant. Hans pressed the commander to ask if he had received the letter notifying them of this trip. The commander stared blankly and asked, "What letter?" clearly having tossed that stack of papers into the trash without bothering to read a single word. He lumbered forward, bending down to look at Isaac appraisingly, feeling this face was somewhat familiar. He smirked, mocking Bessemer by asking if he had just dragged a kid who was about to cry all the way here. Carlson demanded that he watch his mouth, but the commander was only busy marveling at how fast time flies, and how Isaac looked a lot like his mother. Isaac's face hardened upon hearing this stranger judge him with such a flippant attitude. Isaac didn't care about what he said, coldly demanding that he put on some clothes before wanting to talk further. All around, soldiers were busily cleaning up the carcasses of the magical beasts and moving the injured toward the barracks. Hans spoke up, affirming that from now on Isaac was the rightful lord of this Windfelt region. The commander sat down on a log, his expression indifferent as if he didn't care much about Isaac's lord title. He casually brought up how Isaac's mother had died tragically and remarked that he didn't look sad at all. Hans worriedly asked Isaac if he really wanted to stay in this harsh and perilous place. The commander scratched his head, saying he still felt a bit uneasy in his heart. He abruptly raised his hand, pointing his thick finger straight at Isaac. He loudly asked if this was the useless child cursed by rumors that everyone kept talking about. He turned to look at Bessemer to await confirmation for his suspicion. His eyes narrowed maliciously as he stared hard at the young master. He laughed heartily upon realizing he had guessed correctly, a laugh steeped in heavy contempt. The giant's hand tightened around the handle of the heavy iron axe. He advised Isaac to scram while he was still being polite, because there was no room here to babysit a foolish child. He heaved the giant axe onto his shoulder, creating an invisible, crushing pressure on everyone around. Bessemer hurriedly called out to the commander upon seeing the situation turn sour. A cold and utterly disdainful look from the giant directed at Isaac. Isaac stood his ground, declaring that if he dared to chase him away, this camp would also be wiped out soon enough, because the Wolf King is coming. Isaac's words seemed to freeze the surrounding atmosphere. The commander paused for a beat, looking at Isaac with suspicion. He interrogated him, asking what a snot-nosed kid like Isaac knew about warfare. His hand tightened on the axe handle, veins bulging with anger. An axe slash tore through the wind, the pressure forcing Isaac to squint as the gale hit his face. The axe blade stopped mere millimeters from Isaac's face. The commander roared that he had brought down countless wolf kings, so Isaac better shut his trap and know his place. The commander's eyes blazed with fury, ready to crush anyone daring to challenge his authority. But Isaac maintained his cold blue eyes, not even blinking once in front of the deadly axe blade. "Carlson, put your weapon down," Isaac calmly ordered, as if the axe blade meant nothing at all. At this moment, everyone was shocked to realize that Carlson had quietly appeared behind and pointed a sword at the commander's neck out of nowhere. Carlson looked at the giant with sharp eyes, filled with absolute loyalty to his master. Carlson softly replied, "Understood," and slowly loosened his sword, ending a heart-stopping confrontation right in the snowy forest. The commander was shocked, unable to believe that Carlson could approach him that fast without him even knowing. Isaac used his hand to gently push the sword blade pressing close to his face away, casually telling Bessemer that whether to believe it or not was up to him. His eyes gleamed with determination. Isaac affirmed that he would show no mercy to anyone who dared to block his way in protecting his territory. The giant looked at Isaac with a completely different expression, realizing that the blood of great warriors was truly flowing inside this kid. "I am Isaac von Goethe," he proudly stated his name while his hand began to decisively draw the sword from its scabbard. Isaac reiterated his identity as the heir to the bloodline of Adele, the daughter of the famous grand chieftain of the warrior tribe. The challenge to a single combat rang out, making Hans, standing nearby, break out in a cold sweat, fearing for the young master's safety. Isaac coldly affirmed what he would do right after defeating the tall commander. Drawing his sword from its scabbard, Isaac declared that he would be the one to hold supreme command over this entire Winfeld camp. Isaac's sharp sword tip pointed straight at the commander, leaving him completely stunned by the overwhelming aura of the young lord. A bearded, sturdy-looking man loomed in front of the camp, a sinister smile spreading across his scarred face. He mocked the boy standing before him, calling him a fool seeking his own death for daring to provoke him. The gray-haired guard was startled in horror to see the white-haired young master accept the rude guy's provocation without a moment of hesitation. He called out his name to warn him, but it was too late to stop what had been set in motion. The tall warrior pointed up at the sky, declaring that the duel would take place right at noon the next day. When the sun reached its peak returning to the camp, the young master's cold blue eyes closely stared at the giant man standing in front of him. Despite the lurking danger, he still offered to let him sleep in a tent for the night, treating this confrontation as nothing more than routine business. The two stood opposite each other beneath the bare winter trees. The rude guy bluntly said that if he wanted to run away, this was his last chance. But the boy's expression did not waver at all. That night, the old soldier went deep into the tent to question the young master, demanding to know why he had provoked such a dangerous person. An elite official, with eyes sharp as knives, spoke up to reveal a crucial detail. A guy named Bessemer wasn't an ordinary soldier. He was a berserker. The official explained that berserkers are famous for their uncontrollable aggressiveness, often causing them to die young. Yet Bessemer had overcome that fate and outlived most of his kind. The young master was calmly whetting his sword blade, being asked if he understood the weight of that truth. He replied that surviving as a berserker meant Bessemer not only had brute strength, but also the discipline to restrain it with patience and judgment. The old soldier's face tightened with worry. He admitted the young master clearly understood the danger, but still asked why he had willingly thrown himself into it. Outside the tent, two other soldiers, Hans and Carlson, stood anxiously. A voice called out to them, urging them to speak up against the young master's reckless decision. Hans hesitated, remaining silent while someone else patted his head contemptuously. Unmoved, the young master dismissed them to rest, saying he needed to sleep before tomorrow's duel and telling Hans to bring Schiller tomorrow. Hans's face turned pale, stuttering an apology. Clearly, he wanted to object further, but didn't know how to phrase it. The young master coldly cut him off, telling him he was standing in the way. Hans stood frozen, taken aback by the bluntness. The two soldiers backed out of the tent flap, disappearing into the dark night, leaving the young master alone with his thoughts. Right outside, one of the figures in black cloaks whispered to himself, swearing that if the young master were truly in peril, he wouldn't just stand by and watch. Lying down to rest, the young master also added a final warning of his own. Once that time came, nothing anyone said could stop him from acting. He only replied that it was up to them. Then the two lay down on separate beds. The tension between them remained unresolved. Afterward, another black-cloaked shadow asked Carlson if they had set off yet. Carlson replied with a single confirming word. Carlson reported that there were strange movements among the soldiers in the camp. The young master didn't care, telling him to ignore it and focus solely on the assigned task. Under the night sky, a dark-haired man nodded lightly, accepting the command without asking any further questions. Morning came abruptly. The young master woke up with a start. Blood smeared across his forehead and cheeks, his expression frozen in shock. He sat up on the bed, dazed and bloody, staring straight ahead in stunned silence while the bedsheet was soaked around him. Hanging above the bed was the carcass of a hell wolf tied to the tent's crossbeam, blood dripping steadily onto him as he realized it was intentionally placed there, and those who did this viewed it merely as a prank. Outside, a soldier tore open the tent flap and screamed in alarm, calling out to the young master as daylight poured into the wrecked tent. A group of soldiers standing nearby laughed, openly mocking him and asking if he had eaten wolf meat last night. Hans angrily stepped forward, asking how those claiming to be Goethe's soldiers could do such a thing, but was immediately cut off by another voice ordering him to shut his mouth, ignoring the tense atmosphere around them. The young master got up and said the priority right now was just to wash the blood off his body. Hans turned toward him, calling out his title, his face full of worry. By the water basin, the young master poured bucket after bucket of cold water over his head, washing the blood off in silence. His composure did not waver despite having just been through it all. Schiller stood outside the tent, questioning how people claiming to be Goethe soldiers could do something so vile. Someone else told him not to waste his breath, because direct confrontation would only make them deny it flat out. The old commander rushed to the scene, furious, demanding to know where Carlson had gone and what he was doing while this humiliating prank took place. The young master, now calm by the water basin, spoke up to defend Carlson, explaining that he had simply gone on a mission assigned by himself. He wrung out his wet hair, still maintaining a terrifyingly calm composure, prompting the voice beside him to admit he couldn't believe the boy was so serene after everything. An old memory resurfaced, returning to an investigation following the ritual of an evil cult, a place once searched to find the full truth about that event. What they found was simply described as nothing different from hell, a blood-soaked scene and dark ritual signs that no one could forget. It was said that an ordinary child facing something so horrific would easily be pushed to madness. Yet the young master had walked through it all without collapsing. The old commander arrived again, finally finding him and calling his name as he waded through the muddy campgrounds. He remarked that the tent looked terrible, but seemed relieved that there was no serious damage. The young master coldly repeated his words, pointing out that he was covered in blood and filth. The commander pressed further, asking if it wasn't a blessing that it was only that much. The butler replied with a dry question, telling him to repeat what he had just said. Carlson wondered aloud whether Winfeld truly belonged to Gerda, since the land was originally seized only by force. His face was full of unease as he weighed the weight of that question. A group of warriors stood under the night sky, one reminding the butler that the crowd still bowed only because the prince was alive and well. The butler's silence was the answer. The white-haired young master sat by the bathhouse, brushing that matter aside and turning to Carlson, asking for the result of the order he had given. Carlson confirmed everything went exactly as the young master predicted. Carlson asked further, revealing that the Hellwolf pack attacked the camp not just out of hunger. He asked if the young master had intentionally assigned Carlson to investigate them, sensing that behind that decision lay something much deeper. Standing alone near the camp's wooden wall, the young master wondered to himself what reason could lie behind it all, his expression hard to read while snow drifted around. A forceful blow cut through the air as the giant axe blade swung down, the impact echoing throughout the camp. The young master and his subordinates stared with solemn expressions as the confrontation began to unfold before their eyes. The young master's sharp blue eyes narrowed as the midday drum echoed across the fortified camp. In front of him was a tall warrior holding a battle axe, the two facing each other on the empty grounds. The bald, bearded giant mocked the young master for stepping out instead of running away, taunting that it wasn't too late to turn back and flee. Unflinching, the young master raised his sword, declaring that first they needed to agree on the rules of the duel. He proposed using the ritual of the Wait tribe to choose the leader as the method to decide the outcome, then cut his own palm as a gesture showing the seriousness of the tradition. The giant's eyes narrowed upon seeing this, acknowledging that the young master had thoroughly studied tribal customs and arrived fully prepared for the challenge ahead. With a fierce battle cry, the giant swung his axe in a wide, powerful arc, the blade slicing through the air toward his opponent. Blood dripped from the injured hand, the wound marking the price paid before the clash truly began. The giant bent down to grasp the young master's small hand within his own massive palm. The contrast between the two was clear as they stood connected before the peak of the battle. Among the onlookers, a worried subordinate asked Carlson if he intended to save the young master. He was startled when Carlson bluntly replied, "Who else is there to save?" The bandaged subordinate panicked, shouting that this was nothing less than a battle between a giant and child. Sweat streamed down his face out of fear for the outcome. Carlson turned back, coldly calling him a failed subordinate, leaving the other stunned and not knowing how to respond. The young master's cold, focused expression cut through the tension as he told them to shut up and just watch what was about to happen. A strong wind tore through the trees as the giant charged, axe raised high, closing the distance across the snowy ground toward the smaller opponent. With a single decisive blow, the giant's massive frame was sent flying backward, slamming to the ground in a burst of light as the young master stood firm. After ending the duel with just a single strike, the giant swung his fist and axe simultaneously in a fierce downward strike, roaring as he poured all his strength into the blow to finish the fight. Carlson turned to the sweating subordinate beside him and told him to watch closely, both attentively tracking the unfolding clash. Carlson thought about what kind of person his master truly was, recalling his sharp determination before the image of the young master's tear-stained face flashed in his mind. A massive explosion of dust and force tore through the ground, the shock waves spreading out and making nearby soldiers startle and shield themselves. The subordinate stammered in disbelief, realizing what had just happened. Steel met steel, sparking a flurry of sparks as a giant weapon repeatedly struck down. A young man in a dark cloak took the full weight of the blow, sent flying backward across the frozen ground. His sword barely withstood the crushing force. Two soldiers stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, watching the scene unfold. One turned to the other in disbelief, unable to make sense of what they had just witnessed. The young master had coldly blocked Bessemer's attack, and it didn't make any sense. The Gerda house was famous for training mages, not swordsmen. The bald, bearded warrior lowered his massive axe blade onto his shoulder, assessing the kid who had just blocked his blow. He brushed it off easily, muttering that it was just luck, nothing more. The silver-haired young man was panting, kneeling on the ground, his sword still gripped tightly in his hand. He repeated those words in his mind, unable to accept them easily. Luck alone couldn't explain what had just happened, and he knew it well. Among the soldiers' ranks, tension spread fast. One called out to his comrade, demanding answers about what they had just seen the young master do. Words poured out in a rush, shock still plain on their faces. Elsewhere, a dark-haired man observed from afar, a thin smile briefly touching the corner of his mouth. He pondered the mystery, wondering how the boy had used magic without anyone noticing during the cast. The story flashed back to a month earlier in a quiet training area. The silver-haired young master stood before an elderly swordsman. His expression was serious and determined. He asked directly what it took to defeat him in swordsmanship. Within just a month, the two faced each other, practicing swords inside a room resembling an old chapel. The instructor replied without hesitation that it was impossible, that the young master stood no chance at all. But he pressed further, asking what would happen if losing simply wasn't an option, if he was forced to win at all costs. The instructor held up 3 fingers, stating his conditions clearly. There were 3 conditions that needed to be met for that victory to happen, and he told the young master to listen carefully. The bearded axe-wielder, who would later attack him, spoke through the memory. The first condition was very clear. The enemy had to look down on the opponent, be distracted, and be overconfident. That same giant knelt slightly, grasping the boy's hand as if sealing an agreement. The second condition followed right after. The match needed a specific, clear victory condition, something to aim at rather than the vague concept of winning. Back in the courtyard, the dark-haired instructor pointed straight at the young master, emphasizing the final point. The final condition, he said, was the most important. The boy needed a surefire move, something that could absolutely guarantee victory the moment an opportunity arose. The instructor added an accompanying condition. Wanted to meet all 3 conditions meant spending every waking hour of the month doing just that. The young master didn't care, remarking dryly that his teacher had a roundabout way of calling something impossible. Even so, he decided to try. Time passed. A dazzling clash of light erupted on the training ground. 2 currents of energy collided in a brilliant explosion. Sparks flew into the dark. In the middle, the young master gripped his sword, muscles tense. His eyes locked onto his opponent as the force of the collision radiated outward. Something had changed in the way he moved. On the ground, panic showed on the elderly swordsman's face as his own weapon was knocked out of his hand. He stared at his empty hand, demanding to know how his strike had been deflected completely. The young master only looked up at him, a hint of understanding in his eyes. The answer was revealed piece by piece, showing an image of a sparkling sword covered in a shimmering glow. It was just a trick, he admitted, nothing more. Defeating a trained soldier using just raw skill and strength was impractical. But there was a problem. No one was allowed to find out he was a mage. The scene shifted deeper into a dusty private room. The young master stood alone, flipping through the pages of a thick, old grimoire. He quietly explained the method he devised to solve that very problem. The book belonged to Bishop Leovonius, a grimoire based on phase-shift magic, capable of firing deadly stakes. He described tearing the pages directly out of the book's spine and pasting them onto the inner side of his scabbard, hidden from everyone's view. The final piece was completed in his own words. By channeling mana through the blade, the formula embedded in the grimoire would trigger upon contact, and the sword itself would cast the spell, turning an ordinary blade into a weapon no one suspected of having magic. The sword hovering in his hand wasn't actually being held at all. It was suspended mid-air by phase-shift magic, just looking convincing enough for anyone looking to believe his hand was doing the work. The real difficulty revealed itself as soon as the plan was put into action. The blade literally just floated there, detached from his hand, and that alone created a problem no ordinary swordsman ever faced. To make the sword look like it was being swung with real force, he had to move like a puppeteer with invisible strings, guiding a weapon responding to magic rather than muscle. Every movement had to be shaped by a second spell layered over the first, controlling the blade's path with precision that allowed no hesitation or error. The mana supplying everything had to be measured with absolute balance. Too little, and the sword wouldn't move convincingly. Too much, and the illusion would shatter in an instant. His eyes remained locked on his opponent, tracking every tiny movement, because the illusion could only hold if his timing matched his opponent's real motion. Opposite him, the axe-wielding warrior lunged forward, his giant frame closing the distance fast. The young man recognized his opponent's foot placement, a small detail telling him everything about what was coming. He read the motion building in the other's shoulders, the subtle shift right before swinging the axe, a cue most fighters never thought to watch for. From just those two details, he could calculate where the blade would land seconds before it moved. This part, he thought, wasn't the hard part. The real skill had been forged long before this match, in countless quiet nights alone. He had run through imaginary battles in his head until every scenario became familiar. Now factoring in the raw force of Bessemer's axe swing as the blade descended toward him, he made the final calculation needed to counter, adjusting the mana flowing into the blade, tightening his grip as the enchanted sword responded, ready to meet the incoming blow with the exact force required. The blades collided and Bessemer's axe was violently knocked off course. Sparks and light burst from the point of impact. As the large man staggered back, anger contorted Bessemer's face as he regained his balance, spitting insults at the boy who had just used his own strength against him. He roared, telling him not to drag it out but to fall down, then swung his axe again with even greater force. From the sidelines, the observing soldiers grew uneasy. One asked if Bessemer was taking the match too seriously, urging him to calm down since this was supposed to be just a sparring match. Bessemer only replied with a roar ordering silence, his temper completely out of control as the match slipped further past his grasp. The young master's blade slashed through in a wave of light and motion, his expression sharp and unwavering as he began to speak, warning that anyone who dared meddle in what was happening right now would face the consequences. He finished his thought as the sword clashed again, declaring that no one had the right to disrupt what both sides had agreed was a sacred duel between them. The final blow tore through the air, a streak of motion and color marking the end of the exchange, leaving the duel's outcome hanging on that very decisive strike. The bearded warrior roared down at the boy on the ground, his voice full of rage as he swore his axe would tear him apart. He raised his weapon high above his head, ready to finish the match with a single crushing blow. In that instant, a thought flashed through the young master's mind. Exchanging blows with Bessemer had taught him an important thing about the man standing before him. He recalled Carlson's sword from a previous meeting, remembering the feeling that that sword was much heavier and far more sophisticated than what he was facing now. A wave of certainty rose within him. He realized with sudden clarity that this match could actually be won. The axe blade descended in a wide, brutal arc, closing the distance between them, as the young master defended, raising his sword to meet it. Bessemer's eyes widened. The exact moment the two blades clashed, disbelief clearly showed on his face as he watched his own axe blade begin to slip from his hand. The weapon spun away and struck the ground, plunging deep into the dirt, now useless and completely out of his grip. Both groups of observing soldiers watched from afar, tension spreading through the ranks as they realized what had just transpired between the two warriors. The young master calmly reminded him that a waiter-style duel had one simple rule. It ended the moment one side's weapon touched the ground, and Bessemer's axe was now lying right there in the dirt. Among the stunned onlookers, a soldier was nearly speechless, whispering that the boy had actually won. Disbelief spread through the remaining group as they rushed over, repeating the same realization to one another, unable to fully make sense of what they had just witnessed. A soldier grabbed his hair, sneering and calling him a kid, only for the young master to sharply correct him, stating his name clearly for everyone to hear: Isaac von Goethe. Bessemer's voice roared over everything, forcing the surrounding soldiers to quiet down with an angry demand telling everyone to shut their mouths. The soldiers around Isaac stepped back as heavy footsteps approached. Bessemer strode up to him with clear hostility written on his face. He grabbed Isaac's collar, roaring that no ordinary warrior could reverse the tide like that, demanding to know precisely what kind of trick had been used against him. Unflinching, Isaac asked bluntly if Bessemer was going to deny his own defeat and questioned whether he was really willing to throw away a warrior's honor over. Bessemer's anger only deepened. He spat back that Isaac had defiled the sacredness of the duel and swore that the insult would be washed away with his blood. From further up the road, multiple figures advanced quickly. Someone shouted angrily at the soldiers standing there, demanding to know why none of them had stepped in to stop what was happening. From further up the road, multiple figures advanced quickly. Someone shouted angrily at the soldiers standing there, demanding to know why none of them had stepped in to stop what was happening. Anger flared across the soldiers' faces as the threat was dropped and the warning emphasized. Anyone standing there would be executed for treason if Isaac came to harm. Chaos broke out among Bessemer's subordinates as several soldiers grabbed him. One shouted for him to snap out of it, while another accused him of being a madman, trying to drag them all to their deaths. Isaac struggled against the hands holding him, demanding to be let go. Bessemer's face twisted with suppressed anger, sweat streaming down his forehead as his subordinates used all their strength to hold him back. He shouted again, this time louder, repeating his demand for them to let him go immediately. That night, beneath the starry sky, a voice broke the silence, asking why they hadn't been informed of the plan beforehand. Isaac sat on the bed, his sword resting across his thighs, explaining calmly that he needed both his companion and Hans to react convincingly so Bessemer would take the bait and underestimate. Schiller's reply came dry and full of doubt. Schiller brought a hand to his forehead, clearly dazed, asking since when Isaac had the ability to pull off something like that. He looked straight at Isaac, connecting the pieces, pointing to the strange magic he had witnessed ever since the previous mana explosion. Schiller asked bluntly why Isaac hadn't told him the truth from the start. Isaac's answer was simple. Schiller already knew the reason, because his own condition was identical to the one from a century ago. Schiller stiffened, calling it the awakening of the bloodline, before adding that his father would never have allowed Isaac access to the records of previous generations. The young master's expression grew distant as he admitted that given his critical condition at the time, he didn't care about asking for permission. He had snuck in and checked those records. He continued explaining that if rumors of him being able to use magic spread, no one in the kingdom would accept it, asking Schiller to keep that secret with him. Schiller's eyes narrowed with unease as a question formed in his mind. Was magic truly the only thing Isaac was hiding from everyone around him? In a quiet hallway lit by faint moonlight, a sharp-eyed man in formal attire stood by the door, observing something unfolding out of sight. Inside the room, a woman knelt gently by the bed, caring for a small child while a tall figure stood close behind, quietly watching. The baby on the bed slept peacefully, breath visible in the cold air, completely unaware of everything happening around them. Time had passed since then, and now Isaac knelt with a sword in his hand, a quiet realization settling in that at some point, without him fully realizing it, he had become a completely different person. He gripped his sword tightly, whispering a word of agreement to himself, steady and determined. Isaac turned to Schiller and told him he needed a favor. Schiller stood straight, asking cautiously what kind of favor it was. Schiller looked at him closely, piecing something together himself, realizing that the recent duel had truly granted Isaac command at Winfeld. Isaac's gaze sharpened, calm and certain as he declared that it was finally time for him to start acting like a true lord. Snow fell quietly over the fortified outpost as lanterns flickered along the ramparts. Watchtowers standing guard over the rows of tents where soldiers rested before the coming conflict.